Committee on Oversight and Government Reform to come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We have an important hearing today examining the management practices and misconduct at the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA. As we enter the summer travel, many Americans are headed to the airport. We get a lot of people come in from overseas who want to travel domestically, but got a lot of Americans who are taking their families or going on business, the whole array, everything you can think about it. And the numbers are pretty amazing how many people travel on a daily basis. But often when they get there, they're finding that there are very long lines. Now, we need our airplanes and airports to be as secure as possible, but the practices of securing those airports, I think, continues to be an ongoing question, because sometimes the lines become so difficult and so long. During 1 week in mid-March, nearly 6,800 passengers missed their flights due to long waits at TSA checkpoints. At the Charlotte airport, passengers waited more than 3 hours just to get through security. And many airports are complaining TSA is only getting worse, not better, and yet there has been a rise in the sheer number of people that were working at the TSA, certainly since its inception. But you're also going to find that the attrition rate is pretty stunning, and there's a reason why. I think it's a key indicator as to how the organization is performing and who's being rewarded and not being rewarded, and how do people generally feel about the organization. I think people are patient. They're willing to wait in line if they feel like the airport is becoming secure. But last summer, the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General performed covert testing at TSA's airports security screenings and found, quote, failures in technology, failures in TSA procedures, and human error, end quote. The IG, the Inspector General, testified before this committee that, quote, layers of security were simply missing, end quote. I understand that some recommendations are still outstanding, although I appreciate the TSA has taken steps to address many of the Inspector General's findings. As TSA works to improve security and reduce wait times to reasonable levels, the agency's staffing problem threatens to undermine its progress. Currently, the agency is losing, think about this, these numbers are pretty stunning. They're losing about 103 screeners each week through attrition. Now that's a little bit of a scary number, because I think that's telling us that they really don't like working there. In 2014, this is again a very stunning number, 373 people joined, but 4,644 people departed. There are a lot of people looking for good jobs, good opportunity in this country, and so when you have 4,600 people leave that job, and they're only able to attract 373, what does that tell you? It tells you there's probably a management problem there, and that there's probably some challenges and some underlying things and causes that ought to be examined. The government actually, I think, does a good job in that it surveys federal employees at all the different agencies across all of government. And remember, there's more than 2 million federal employees out there. Of the 320 agencies that are ranked and scored, the TSA ranked 313 out of 320, as making it one of the worst places to work. The committee has been contacted by a large number of whistleblowers who have given us some insight into what might be. We've also reached out to some individuals. I don't want you to assume that the panel here today are simply whistleblowers. In fact, that's not the case. One of the biggest causes that have attributed to its TSA challenges is leadership and management. Strong, effective leadership could not be more important to an agency fraught with problems. Instead, as we've chatted with people and whistleblowers who's come forward, we found that the TSA has developed a highly retaliatory culture that discourages speaking up about problems. They've also raised concerns about leadership failing to punish high-level managers who commit misconduct. When hard-working rank-and-file men and women are severely punished, yet their managers get off easy, it creates a morale problem. And allowing such a culture to fester has a highly detrimental effect on the mission of the agency, keeping the airways safe. I don't care where you are in life or what you're doing, when you see somebody who's doing something bad and it's not fixed, it's demoralizing. And when you have maybe a group of people on the line doing one thing and something happens and they get treated differently than the management, it's very demoralizing. And I think that's clearly what we're seeing at the TSA. Today's hearing is intended to focus on the toll management challenges like this take on TSA employees. There's those tasked with protecting our transportation infrastructure. This brings us to our witnesses today, who are here to discuss their own experiences with systematic management leadership challenges at the TSA. Their testimony before this committee, like all of their interactions with this committee, is protected. It is against the law to retaliate against individuals for engaging in protected activity. It doesn't matter if we reach out to them or they reach out to us, they are protected from retaliation. As communications to the press about waste, fraud, and abuse or mismanagement are also protected communications. These important disclosures are often an effective way to bring waste, fraud, and abuse or mismanagement to the attention of those who are in a position to remedy it. But sometimes it doesn't matter how many protections you have in place. Management and leadership in federal agencies find subtle ways to marginalize or demean those who do nothing more than speak the uncomfortable truth. I want to be clear that this committee will not stand for reprisal against individuals for cooperating with congressional investigations. It's especially true for today's witnesses. We appreciate their brave stature to come forward and at some risk, come and chat with us before Congress. But it is the way we're going to get to the truth. It is the way we're going to be able to protect the greater whole. And I think the gentlemen here today will provide valuable insight and hopefully can make the whole of government, the whole of the TSA in its vital mission, a better place to do it. So we thank these gentlemen for stepping forward and participating with us today. And with that, I will now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today we hear the testimony of 3 employees from the Transportation Security Administration who allege a series of abuses and improper practices within that agency. Whistleblowers are essential to identifying waste, fraud, and abuse, and they are critical to this committee's mission. In fact, based on the work conducted by this committee today, federal statutes protect employees who bring wrongdoing to light. I know the Chairman and I share a strong commitment to ensuring that federal employees who come before us are protected from retaliation and reprisal. Equally important, we as members of the committee also have an obligation to run these allegations to ground and determine if we can substantiate them. Of course, just as we want to protect whistleblowers from retaliation, I'm sure we all agree that we also want to protect federal employees from claims that are not substantiated. I thank all 3 of these men who have stepped forward today for their willingness to testify and for the information that they provided in their transcribed interviews with the committee staff. These individuals have raised troubling allegations of improper personnel practices within TSA. All 3 have filed complaints with the Office of Special Counsel through the Equal Employment Opportunity process or in federal court. Each allegation we've heard deserves a thorough and fair investigation. I think these 3 individuals deserve that too. Unfortunately, as we hold this hearing today, the committee has not yet had an opportunity to complete such an investigation. In some cases, we have not spoken with those who have firsthand knowledge of the allegations we have heard. We've also not yet heard from TSA regarding most of the allegations raised by these employees. I hope the committee will talk with all of the individuals involved and review all of the documents relevant to the issues we will discuss today. After all, that is fairness and that is thoroughness. Many of the allegations our witnesses today have raised were initiated under previous agency administrators. In some cases, the allegations were even resolved under previous administrators. It also appears that the current TSA administrator, Vice Admiral Peter Neffinger, has moved to address many of the practices that have been cited by the whistleblowers. One of today's witnesses, Brainard, described this progress in his transcribed interview with the committee by saying, and I quote, "I think we've made tremendous progress with Mr. Neffinger." He added, and I quote, "Since Mr. Neffinger has come in, I've heard nothing in terms of misconduct," end of quote. Under Administrator Neffinger, TSA has issued new policies that clarify the membership and the role of the Executive Resources Council, curtail the abuse of awarding multiple achievement bonuses for the same activities, and ensure that directed reassignments are made only to support agency goals. Administrator Neffinger has also moved to address the airport security lapses identified by the Inspector General and by the agency's own testing teams that we examined in this committee's hearing on TSA last fall. He has ended the Managed Inclusion 2 program that permitted individuals who had not received background risk assessments to receive expedited screening. And he has placed agency focus squarely on resolving all alarms at screening checkpoints. As Administrator Neffinger testified before this committee last fall, he is, and I quote, "readjusting the measurements of success to focus on security rather than speed," end of quote. And so I'm pleased to see that his actions are beginning to show real progress. However, people may not want to hear this, but these actions are likely to slow lines at airports even further. And things may get even worse if TSA's workforce continues to be reduced. Administrator Neffinger recently testified that the TSA has nearly 6,000 fewer transportation security officers in its workforce than it had 4 years ago. It is being asked to do more with less, and that is indeed a problem. So I hope that our committee will continue to focus on holding TSA accountable for completing essential reforms that we will provide, and that we will provide him with the resources he needs to do his job. And so I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses today, and I want to thank you all for being with us. Mr. Chairman, with that, I will yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who'd like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our witnesses. We're pleased to welcome Mr. J. Brainard, Federal Security Director for the State of Kansas in the Office of Security Operations at the Transportation Security Administration. Mr. Mark Livingston is the Program Manager in the Office of the Chief Risk Officer at the Transportation Security Administration. And Mr. Andrew Rhods, Assistant Federal Security Director for Mission Support at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport in the Office of Security Operations at the TSA. We welcome you and thank you for being here. If you will please raise your right hand. Rise and raise your right hand. Sorry. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated and let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate it if you limit your verbal comments to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be entered into the record. And we'll start with Mr. Brainard. You're now recognized for 5 minutes. Make sure you bring that microphone nice up and close there. You can straighten it out, but I want to make sure we get you clearly on audio. Thank you, Mr. Brainard. You're now recognized.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, I'm pleased to appear at the request of this committee today to discuss issues surrounding the Transportation Security Administration. Our business is a serious business. The national strategy of the United States of America is clear. Defending our nation against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, is the first fundamental commitment of the federal government. When that commitment is in danger of being fulfilled, then it is incumbent upon those of us entrusted to ensure our national security to come forward, and if necessary, report to you, and to do so at whatever the cost may be. We are all here today for that purpose. While the new administrator of TSA has made security a much-needed priority once again, make no mistake about it, we remain an agency in crisis. TSA remains in crisis as a result of poor leadership and oversight of many of our senior leadership appointments which have taken place over the past several years, some of which still serve in key positions within our agency today. Our culture went into rapid decline after having gone unchecked by its leader in various agencies and committees responsible for that oversight, and for that reason we continue to have a crisis of leadership and culture. From 2011 to early 2012, TSA chose, in abundance, unprepared employees to fill key leadership vacancies. These were people who were chosen not because they were time-tested leaders or mature or experienced in actually leading people in large, complex organizations, but because they were liked or good at managing programs or projects. In fact, many of these leaders lacked any security experience and had ever worked in the field operation their entire career. The continuous result of the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey each federal agency's workforce responds to is graded by its own people, has declared repeatedly our agency has failed its employees year after year. We continue to have a culture problem in TSA brought on by an unwillingness to address misconduct of senior executives combined with poor leadership and decision-making, all of which have been the #1 contributing factor of our security risks and which led to our poor performance. We have low morale, a lack of trust, and field leaders who are fearful to speak out, and for good reason. People at all levels of the agency, both in the field and at headquarters, have spent most of their time constantly looking over their shoulder when doing the right thing. And let me make one thing abundantly clear. This is not a TSA headquarters issue. There are legions of decent people at our headquarters who are just as disgusted and just as concerned as I am sitting here today. This is and has always been a senior executive issue, a senior executive problem. I refer to those at the very top of the food chain. For years, we had many senior executives, most of which who completely lacked the experience needed for their position, run amok and make decisions or conduct themselves in an unethical manner which eroded our ability to complete the security mission and grossly compromise the integrity of our agency. Until substantive change occurs, TSA will remain a culture of positional leadership. Despite the results of our covert testing being made public, we still have some of those very same leaders in critical positions whose focus and attention are on numbers first and leave security and people last. In fact, many of the same people who broke our agency remain in key positions of influence even today. Because of this, we continue to empower positional leaders who obtain compliance because they fill a certain leadership vacancy, and to be clear, they are not followed because they are leaders. Subordinates follow these positional leaders out of fear, whose only objectives are limited to bean counting and instilling fear into anyone who opposes them. These leaders are some of the biggest bullies in government, and as a result, many people feel battered, abused, and overworked. These positional leaders convince themselves they are liked by everyone and their decisions are accepted because there's almost no one left to question them. They have become powerful in their own mind and regularly make decisions regardless of the people affected by them. I know of several people in key leadership positions that went along to get along, who regret having supported the agenda of those positional leaders. In an effort to clean up our agency, TSA's former administrator, John Pistol, and his deputy, John Helinski, instituted an agency-wide ethics training complete with a TSA wall of shame for the purpose of exposing a few bad apples in our agency and publicly shaming them. And to quote Mr. Helinski's message, to our people, in one of the videos every employee is required to see, people were better than this. Well, that wall of shame is more than a few names light today, as senior executives in TSA have been held to a completely different standard than the rest of the agency. Not one person for the state of our agency is glad to see any of us here today. Those who have spoken up have been and continue to be targeted and victimized with the goal of running them out of federal service. Under the previous administration, complaints were buried, and in many cases, so were the complainers. No significant, consistent, or even proportionate action has been taken to remove or even hold leaders in the TSA executive service properly accountable for misconduct and poor performance. While the results of our covert testing were made public last May, it was embarrassing, and when it came time to address this problem, the people who were really to blame never stepped forward to accept or even acknowledge any responsibility. Instead, they sat back and they watched our officers on the front line get publicly shamed. The truth is, our officers did not fail. They did exactly what that TSA senior executive leadership team demanded of them. For years, TSA executive leadership's priority shifted further away from security and eventually became focused only on reducing wait times and increasing checkpoint throughput. Those federal security directors who raised concerns or voiced dissenting opinion to leadership were targeted, and one way was through the use of directed reassignments. One of my counterparts had a conversation with one of the very senior executive leaders responsible for our problems who had indicated to him They developed a loyalty list and were systematically removing the federal security directors who were on that list. For those not familiar, a directed reassignment is a tool regularly used by the airline industry to force people into retirement. Because it is technically permissible to do so in civilian service with a business reason, even without a mobility agreement, they targeted specific FSDs and deputies. The only thing wrong with this is they were absent a business reason. As federal security directors' vacancy occurs, many of them were filled with underqualified personnel whose only redemption was their loyalty to the positional leaders who put them there. TSA executive leadership waged an all-out campaign against the federal security directors, and of the 157 original federal security directors hired after the 9/11 attacks, there are only 5 of us left today. When it became public knowledge that the Veterans Administration spent a few $100,000 on the directed reassignment of a few people, the public was outraged. TSA spent millions. In looking at the hearing agenda posted on the committee's website, it mentions what I believe to be the most important part of why we're here, which was the toll that management challenges have taken on our workforce. My opening statement only scratches the surface. As the saying goes, those who not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. While the idea of forgetting mistakes of the past and looking forward to a brighter future sounds good, the reality is our leadership usually changes when there's a change of administration. If that happens, and if these issues continue to go unaddressed, the people who damage this agency will once again be off the leash, and what progress we have made under Administrator Neffinger will have been in vain. We need this committee to take a serious look at the road ahead and ensure this never happens again. I hope to add value to this hearing by answering your questions and providing insight based upon my experiences. Thank you again for having me. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my opening statement.
Thank you.
Mr.
Cummings.
Yes. I'm very pleased, Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Livingston is a resident of Columbia, Maryland. This is an area that is shared between my district and the district representing by my distinguished colleague, Congressman Sarbanes. Mr. Livingston is a constituent of Congressman Sarbanes, and Mr. Sarbanes has written a letter to the committee to express its support for Mr. Livingston and to urge, quote, that the committee thoroughly investigate Mr. Livingston's claims, end of quote. And I just ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, that Congressman Sarbanes' letter be included in the record.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank the gentleman. Mr. Livingston, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you regarding the Transportation Security Administration and the reported issues of misconduct, whistleblower retaliation, security violations, and the lack of accountability pertaining to TSA senior executives and the potential impact on the mission. I'm here today to share with you what I've seen firsthand and as a member of the TSA senior leadership team and as a victim of these reprehensible practices after confronting and reporting misconduct by top leaders. I am here because I believe TSA has major management challenges which are imposing great risk of failure to performing its mission effectively and could have serious consequences for the U.S. national and economic security. It matters what leaders do, and it matters what they do not do. Noted educational leader scholars Gunther and Whitaker have stated the culture of any organization is shaped by the worst behavior the leader is willing to tolerate. In TSA, that worst is yet to be identified because the men and women of the agency keep seeing examples of that worst behavior being confronted by the media, not the Transportation Security Administration leadership, and there seems to be no bottom to this failed leadership abyss. I would like to first state by telling you that the vast majority of the frontline employees at TSA are professional and truly care about the important mission of the agency. Most come in every day and do a great job, but what you hear about is that 1% of failed leadership, and that's why I'm here today. For the record, I'm a career senior intelligence and security management executive, and for the past 36 years, I have served successfully in all my prior roles. I am a disabled Marine veteran, and for the one basic principle that has followed me through my entire adult life is that we do not lie, cheat, or steal, and we do not tolerate those that do. It's that simple. I'm not a novice when it comes to the important matters we will discuss here today. Beyond the almost 4 decades of leadership experience, I bring a scholarly practitioner viewpoint. My doctorate of management focuses on applied research and expanding leadership within the field of executive organizational management. My field of study has been on crisis leadership in organizational crises, the integration of organizational management issues with technological considerations in the global environment while considering the critical role of information technologies in all aspects of management practice has been a direct correlation to my executive leadership role at TSA. I am an expert in the areas of organizational integration. the application of critical thinking skills and how to develop the management high-performance teams, and how to analyze and evaluate organizations. I have held a top-secret clearance for the entire 36 years of my service as an intelligence professional. This is an important note, as I will be identifying security incidents and violations that have occurred at TSA and explain where TSA has failed to act properly. My career professional status is good. I am in good standing with my agency, and I'm not pinned in any administrative action or investigation. I'm here today by my own choice to inform you of those challenges. I relay this information so that the committee might better understand that the issues I raised at TSA were more than just mere misconduct. This is about the inability of TSA to focus on the mission due to the overwhelming EEO complaints and personnel issues brought on by failed leadership. The refusal to address or to hold senior leaders accountable is simply paralyzing this agency. The leadership imperative is missing at TSA. In your role as an oversight committee for TSA, you should be gravely alarmed and concerned with these issues, because TSA employees are less likely to report operational security or threat-relevant issues out of fear of retaliation. No one who reports issue at TSA is safe. This prevents the necessary organizational agility to respond to evolving threats and enemies who are always adapting and to exploit any real potential or perceived opportunity to strike. This negates any operational improvement or process and prevents the agency from fulfilling its mandated mission of protecting the United States transportation system and protecting the economic well-being from threats. Retaliation by TSA senior leadership is used extensively and systematic, as reported by the media and historically acknowledged by the GAO report 10-139, but that was provided to you in October of 2009. The exact same thing happened to me then and has happened to other SES leaders then. Senior organizational leaders use this retaliation as a means to silence those who would report violations, security concerns, or operational issues by forcing employees into early retirement or resignations. No employee will be willing to report these issues when simple fraud, waste, or abuse are reasons for leaders to retaliate against employees. Senior leaders appearing before Congress stated they will correct this behavior or fix TSA should be held to strict timelines, or will you continue to get platitudes and false narratives? I would bet that you've heard this in the last 6 months, yet you continue to hear these media reports. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my congressman and my Senator Cardin for the opportunity to represent me with TSA. This is democracy at its best. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rhodes, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you regarding the TSA's use of punitive directed reassignments, senior leader misconduct, retaliation, and its impact on security. Directed reassignments have been punitively used by TSA senior leadership as a means to silence dissent, force early retirements, or resignations. Senior leader misconduct and retaliation help explain why the TSA underperforms. Recently, I was asked to profile Somali imams and community members visiting my office. I will not do this. I am not a tif-tif. Additionally, my supervisor accused me of, quote, going native after attending a meeting at a local mosque. Those in the community in Minneapolis know I would never betray their trust by profiling them. This unfortunate incident is not reflective of the entire U.S. government. TSA's problems are rooted in the areas of leadership and culture. Ours is a culture of misconduct, retaliation, lack of trust, cover-ups, and the refusal to hold its senior leaders accountable for poor judgment and malfeasance. Habitually, my agency bypasses merit principles in its allocations of awards and hiring. Simply put, we violate Jack Welch's principles of picking people. We elevate people in senior positions that do not have the experience, character, and ability to lead and manage a large, complex organization. The meteoric rise of unqualified individuals eventually corrects itself, but only after subordinates and other employees suffer the consequences of poor leadership. There's a chronic indifference towards investigating legitimate complaints. Moreover, my agency counsel employs non-disclosure agreements to keep people silent about misconduct and malfeasance, and the vicious cycle continues. While some of these issues may predate the current TSA administrator, I've been in direct communication with him and my agency chief counsel on all these issues, some dating back since February of 2015, and I've yet to receive a reply. Directed reassignments. I'm the only TSA employee whose directed reassignment has been accepted by the U.S. Office of Special Counsel. I was given a directed reassignment based on the mistaken belief I was leaking information to the media in Minneapolis and my professional and personal relationship with the former Minneapolis-St. Paul Federal Security Director, Area Director, Chief Operating Officer, and TSA Acting Administrator Ken Kasprzyk. My agency was aware I was a recent father of two wonderful children, but could not leave the state of Minnesota unless I was willing to lose custody of my children. There's a financial price we as taxpayers pay for TSA mismanagement. I estimate the money saved by ending punitive directed reassignments, mismanagement, and out-of-control bonuses to senior executives would likely fund enough transportation security officers to staff some of our largest airports in the nation. The most egregious example of senior leader misconduct occurred with an assistant administrator. This employee sent provocative messages to a subordinate female under his purview. When questioned by an OI agent, he lied 3 times. The recommended penalty for a single lack of candor associated with an official investigation is removal from service. A 24-page Office of Professional Responsibility report recommended this assistant administrator be removed from service. Instead, either the deputy or the acting TSA administrator ignored the advice of the Office of Professional Responsibility. The subject of this investigation is still employed with TSA. Why is it acceptable for TSA senior executives to lie when TSOs are removed for the same infraction? In conclusion, the American public and Congress should care about what occurs in TSA because its senior leaders are mismanaging our agency and our security effectiveness is compromised. Our corporate culture is analogous to the movie Animal House, while the relationship between our headquarters and the field is best depicted in the TV series Game of Thrones. I cannot imagine any company being successful when it treats its employee the way TSA does. If this was a private company, the entire leadership team would have been removed long ago. I thank this committee for the opportunity to appear before you. I thank my Congresswoman from Minnesota, Betty McCollum, for her steadfast support. Until we correct the problems facing my agency, the TSA will always fall short of operating within the band of excellence. Our performance and potential reflects an agency in dire need of oversight. The American public deserves an agency focused on defeating the threat. Employees in TSA, TSOs particular, deserve leaders who value and treat them with respect. We can do much better. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I look forward to answering any questions from you or other members of this committee. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of the committee, we thank all 3 of the witnesses, and we'll now turn to questions, and I'll begin with the first round. All 3 of you are currently TSA employees, correct? And all 3 of you bravely have come forward to talk about retaliation, about a toxic environment, about misconduct within the areas you've worked. What concerns me is some of it is historic, but at least the first witness and the second witness, or third witness, I heard say they believe it still continues. And would you say that's the case? Is this still going on?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes, sir, I would agree.
Mr. Rhodes?
Yes, sir.
So that's very troubling. You unfortunately confirmed some of our worst suspicions. They have a huge bureaucracy in TSA. We've had about 45,000 screeners. We're somewhere in the neighborhood of 42, I guess, is a cap. But 52,000, and I know they cooked the books a bit and moved some positions to other agencies. But there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000 to 10,000 administrative personnel making, well, I know there are 4,000 in the D.C. area make over $103,000 a year on average, so they're well paid. I read the stories of you, what they did to you, and since we've begun this inquiry, we've had dozens of others come forward throughout TSA telling us that they've experienced similar misconduct. I'm a little bit concerned. I've tried to give Neffinger, the new administrator, a chance to straighten things up. But again, you tell me that the people who are the most abusive are still there. Is that right, Mr. Brainard?
Yes, sir. I didn't go on record with your comment. What I have observed in TSA, I think Mr. Neffinger has done his best to engage and get his arm around the situation, but we haven't resolved it. We have had instances happen.
But the people, I mean, this comes from a pretty high level, and the retaliation has taken place. I know there's been some memos, et cetera, operational guidelines that have been revised, but the folks are still in place. That's got to be pretty demoralizing.
It is, and they are still in place. I can tell you that, and I don't want to go into specific detail by mentioning names because they are entitled to some sense of due process in an investigation, but the reality is not only are they still with the agency, some of them are still in their original positions even today. So
Well,
we continue to have this issue.
What concerns me, too, is the ability to perform now is also hindered. Neffinger is well-intended, but some of the reports that leaked about the poor performance, and you saw some cooking of the books, too, on wait times. Is that correct, any of you?
Yes, sir.
You did, Mr. Rhodes. That has been the failures of performance, and then the wait times, and then the retaliation. There's been retaliation for also the facts coming out. I don't want to say that you revealed the facts, but those were the facts of what was taking place. Some of you got blamed for that. Is that correct, Mr. Brainard, Mr. Livingston, Mr. Rhodes?
Yes, sir.
All three. I'm very concerned about what's taken place. Again, Neffinger is well-intended. He's trying to correct the situation with more training, et cetera. But TSA can't recruit, it can't train, it can't retain, it can't schedule, and it can't manage the huge bureaucracy that's been created. That's part of the problem, and it won't be corrected. Then those people on the line see what's taking place. They've pulled me aside at my airport. You see those three guys that are doing nothing, Mr. Micah, sitting there, they're all making over $100 grand. We're busting our tail trying to process these people, and they're having a sit-down chat and enjoying themselves. Part of the, I guess TSA gets the name thousands standing around, but these guys are thousands sitting around earning huge salaries while the others are doing their work. The meltdown that's already occurred, my colleagues, here's just a few headlines. This is Fort Lauderdale, Miami. American Airlines, 6,800 people last month missed their flights. Chicago, 1,100 American Airlines missed their flights. Chicago. Charlotte Airport, 3-hour waits on Good Friday. Long lines, cranky travelers, Seattle. This one's Denver. This one's JFK. I mean, and we haven't gotten to the summer when you get the heavier traffic. You all know what I'm talking about. You think we're headed for a rough time this summer, Mr. Brown?
I absolutely believe that's the case. And, you know, I think it's important to point out that when we're talking about personnel issues and we're going and talking about the senior executive service and the people are still here, it goes beyond that. A lot of the things that you're reading about in the paper, the things about the $1.5 million app, for instance, same decision makers. When you're talking about moving security resources out of airports, same decision makers. When you're talking about, you know, turning the FTE back in order to bean count, which has put us in quite a situation for this summer, same administrators. The same people who broke this agency are the same people who are essentially still running it. And I will offer to you that in post the testing results coming out, there was a Tiger Team effort that took place in TSA. And of that Tiger Team effort, there were some wonderful recommendations that were offered. I can offer you that I served as a senior advisor for a period of about 2 months. And I can tell you the most important part of that survey, most important part of that working group was fix the security. And the second most important part was fix the leadership. And somehow I don't think that message got back.
Well, thank you.
Sir.
Did you want to say something?
Sir, I
Real
can
quick, I'm going to yield as much time to Mr. Cummings, but go ahead.
Sir, I can add a very unique perspective to your first question. As a member of that senior leadership team, I sat in the office or at the table with the other senior leaders as a deputy assistant administrator. I can tell you that Administrator Neffinger has brought a new perspective to the agency. He's actually hired a chief operating officer. The problem is he's got the same people doing the same thing, doing the same problems. He has the right mindset and the energy to change it, but he's got to put different people in different positions. He's not going to get there with the same team. He has the energy and the focus to do it, but he can't do it with the same people.
Well, what you tell us is troubling. Let me yield now to Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for being here. And I'm concerned about the allegations. I think they're very serious allegations. And we definitely need to have a thorough inquiry so we can hear all sides. I think you would agree with that.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Livingston, you testified that you were removed from your position and basically you were demoted. Is that right?
2 grades, that's correct, sir.
So 2 grades, that meant you lost some pay.
I did, yes, sir.
But how much did you lose?
I think it's about $10,000 a year, plus bonuses and other stuff, sir.
Wow. And you said that right at the end of your, so you said that they did it right at the end of your 1-year probationary period. Is that right?
Yes, sir. They
So
removed,
how close were you to the end of the period before they did this?
I think it was roughly about 48 days before my probationary period, but I had served in that period as a probationary SES for 17 months. But because the Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Napolitano, had announced her retirement, they had frozen all ECQs being certified as they put in a new Secretary of Homeland Security at the time. So I was in that position, in an active position, an extraordinary long time. Plus, my agency was slow in getting my ECQs to OPM. The bottom line is they removed me, then investigated me, and when I was cleared, they didn't reinstate me. The reason they removed me is because I had found my senior culpable for pre-selection, and then I had reported another one for sexual harassment. So after they removed me, I had failed my probationary period. And after I had failed it, they couldn't reinstate me. They had already removed me.
So, and what do you think the probationary period is for?
It's to evaluate your performance, sir.
So as I understand it, during your probationary period, you don't have certain important rights. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
Like the ability to challenge your demotion or to appeal, right?
Yes, sir.
So they basically demoted you, and they can demote you if they want you, and you don't have any adequate protections, and there's no due process during that period. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
So you must have been very upset about that.
Well, considering that I had gotten 2 medals and a great midterm and was pending another medal at the time, I was shocked. I was blindsided.
So during your interview with the committee staff, you were asked if it would be easier for agencies to retaliate against employees if probationary periods were extended beyond 1 year, and you said, and I quote, yes. Is that right?
Sure, it would.
You were also asked, and I quote, given what happened to you, and you claim that TSA retaliated against you during your probationary period, would you support probationary periods that are longer than 1 year? And you said, quote, no. Is that right?
In TSA, sir, it hasn't worked. I've seen other agencies where it would. If it's done in good faith, I think it could. But in my current situation, I couldn't see it working for 2 years. So my answer would be no. No, sir.
So there's a proposal that has been made before our committee
Yes, sir.
to extend the probationary period and to make it even longer.
Sir.
That would mean that you could have been demoted even if you worked there even longer. Do you think that that's a good idea?
Well, that recommendation also comes with some other regulations that include a mentor and then 60, 90-day checkups. So there's a process that comes with that where you're informed as you go. I was blindsided, and that recommendation wouldn't allow that.
So if we made it longer, then whistleblowers like you would have fewer due process protections for an even longer period of time. And would you oppose that change?
If it came with checks and balances, I would not be opposed to it, sir. The whole point of being an SES to help the government. It's not about the individual. But if it's not balanced, it wouldn't work. The time period isn't the issue, it's the quality.
I got you.
And TSA hasn't shown that quality, sir. They haven't acted in good faith.
Okay. So, Mr. Brainard and Mr. Rhodes, do you agree with that? And do you oppose having a longer probationary period when whistleblowers like you would have fewer protections?
Sir, I think the problem that's plaguing our agency is the fact that we have codes of conduct, we have policies, but we don't follow them. We have leaders that just abuse their power and authority. On a general term, if we had competent, ethical leaders, you could make the probationary period 10 years. It wouldn't matter if they would do the right thing. But as Mr. Livingston stated, in the current state of TSA, with as much retaliation, with as much of you have to be in an inner circle or liked to get promoted, I absolutely would not support it.
Brainard?
Sir, I really don't care. I don't care if it's a year, I don't care if it's 2 years, as long as there is a checks and balance system in place. I mean, you have to have engaged leadership that is going to follow the performance of the individual. And if the person is not performing, to give them a plan to help them be successful, and if they're not, end it. So as long as there is a structured process in place to help develop the individual and to make a determination if they're going to be a good fit, to me, it doesn't matter how long it is.
So you have a situation where, you're saying no matter who's at the top, you've got people that have been there. I guess most of these people have been there for a while.
Yes, sir.
Did you want to say something, Ms. Livingston?
I was going to answer.
Yeah, let me finish my question. So no matter who you have at the top, you've got these folks underneath. I guess many of them have been around for as long as TSA has been around, I guess. Am I right?
Many, yes, sir.
And are these people easily identifiable? I mean, is it easy to know who they are?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And so they basically, so Neffinger can do whatever he wants or put out whatever mandates or rules or to correct situations generally, but unless you have these folks cooperating, it's still not going to be resolved. Is that a fair statement?
Sir,
Things are not going to be resolved.
my perspective is they're waiting him out to see if he's going to be sticking through, and they're just not giving him a fair, honest, professional shake. And a career professional would support him no matter how long he's going to be there, a day or 10 years. When he makes a decision, it should be carried out, and he's not getting a fair, honest, professional shake.
If I can say also to that, when you're talking about the whole of TSA, some 50 or 60,000 employees, and then you get to the leadership component, that starts getting even smaller. And then you get to the real crux of the problem. We're not talking about 50 people. We're talking about a handful of people up there who've managed to maintain power in this agency who have escaped accountability. Now, some of those people, some of the most egregious offenders, they've departed TSA with either a golden parachute or some private sector lucrative offer. But we're only talking about a handful of people. There are a number of people within the executive service within TSA that are outstanding at what they do, just as there are a number of people at the front line with our officers that are outstanding at what they do. We're talking about a very small number of people, for whatever reason I cannot explain, have managed to hold on to power, and they're the worst people abusers in the agency, and they're still there, and there's nothing being done about that. And I don't know to what extent our current administrator is being empowered to do his job.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Livingston, I have an article which talks about the $336,000 TSA paid to IBM for producing an app. And I have this article says, when an app isn't much more than a random number generator, it's hard to imagine how it could cost that much for the development alone, but it is typical of government spending. And I understand from the staff that you once recommended an analysis that another employee refused to do that and ended up spending $12 million on a project that should have cost just $3 million. Would you tell us about that and any other examples of huge waste that you've seen on your watch?
Sir, Yes, sir. When I came on as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, we did a watch floor transformation. And in that, we had allocated originally $3 to $3.5 million to do this transformation. And because there was no alternative of analysis completed, it was not managed properly. There was a 30, 60, 90-day signature that was completed that was not done properly. So the wrong equipment was ordered, it arrived, didn't work, we had to do it over, and it cost 3 times the amount. And even today, if you went and looked in that watch floor, there's about $500,000 worth of equipment sitting in a box in that office space, and there isn't manned where it should be about 12 people working. There's probably 4, maybe 5 people working. It was a total waste of money, and while it may not sound like a lot when you look at the big picture, it's wasted almost $7, $8, maybe $9 million. That's a lot of money if it was being paid for out of our pocket, and I think the taxpayers would be upset to know that TSA wasted that money.
Well, it may not sound like much to those in the federal government, but I can tell you it sounds like a lot to the average person out there when you waste, when you pay $3 million, when you pay $12 million for something that should have cost $3 million. Do either of you, Mr. Rhodes, Mr. Brainard, have you seen examples of waste in your positions?
Yes, sir. In Minneapolis, we built a regional headquarters for a regional director that had no intentions of coming to Minneapolis. He stayed in Michigan, and throughout that whole process, as I worked with the Office of Real Estate, I would identify, why are we spending $300,000 on an office space that this regional director has no intention of coming to? We are in the process right now of Minneapolis of changing that, but we're going to spend more money to revamp that office space for a coordination center, where we should have done that at the beginning. We identified that years ago. I identified that years ago. But what happens is when you make suggestions like that, they just move around you, or you get cut out of the meeting, and you're not consulted anymore. So we've already spent $300,000 on this office space, and we're going to spend, I don't know, $100,000, $150,000, potentially more, when we should have done that up front. And it's gross mismanagement.
Well, the easiest thing in the world is to spend other people's money. Mr. Brainard?
Sir, I'd like to comment on the app that you just mentioned, and I got to tell you, that's one of the strongest indicators of the mentality that we have, not only of the feeling that they're bankrolled to pretty much do whatever they want, no matter how silly it seems. But when this story came out about the app, you find out that the app's no better than chance. And I put together this Ouija board. It's got expedited screening on it, and standard screening here at the bottom, which would have been just as effective as that app, and it would have cost a lot less. You could have the same type of outcome with a quarter, flipping a quarter at the checkpoint. And
Well, I understand that there have been other software developers who just for fun have created this, a similar app at almost no cost, and to pay $336,000 to IBM was a total ripoff, it seems to me.
yes, sir, I also do app development as well, and I can tell you it does not take a lot of thought to do what they did.
Yes, Mr. Livingston, Dr. Livingston?
Sir, I wanted to make a comment for the record. I pointed out that fraud, waste, and abuse, and I was told to let it go. And I also made a point of saying that this was a lot of money and it was wasteful, and nobody took any action.
All right. Well, let me mention one other thing since my time's running out. Mr. Rhodes, I understand that you think that the wait times at the Minneapolis airport have been falsified. Is that correct? And have you heard about that happening at other locations too?
I cannot comment specifically on other locations. I can comment at Minneapolis. In 2013, we received what's called a Federal Security Director Office of Inspection, basically a health check. And on page 18 of 40, which I provided to this committee, a supervisor at the checkpoints had identified that he or she, it doesn't give his or her gender, had expressed some frustrations that the wait times that they submit up forward was being changed by management. I can tell you at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, the airport police has at times begun to tabulate wait times. So think of that for a second. We are expending police resources at our airports to check on TSA reporting our wait times. And as recently as last month, the airport is investing in some sort of automated wait time calculations. That would indicate, sir, that they don't trust the numbers that we're purporting.
All right, thank you very much.
I thank the gentleman and gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I want to ask one question. I think it was you, Mr. Brainard, who said that there are only a handful of really bad administrative level people. A lot of others have left, but you said there's only a handful. Is that 10? Is that 12? Is that 5?
I'd say it's less than 20, ma'am. I don't know the precise number. Only the people that I deal with in my world. I don't speak for, I'm speaking strictly within operations. I don't speak for the Office of Law Enforcement, the Office of Global Strategies, the Office of Human Capital. There are some 13, 15 different divisions within TSA. I can only speak to what I know and the impact, but I will tell you that operations has the largest piece of the pie.
I think I've got to pay better attention to your organizational chart because I'm really kind of confused where people are located on it, and I will do that. Dr. Livingston? You wrote in the statement you submitted for the record today, and I quote, "Today, TSA lacks the senior leadership courage to make the necessary changes so that the agency can accomplish its mission," right?
I did.
Now, in your transcribed interview with committee staff, you stated the following about Administrator Neffinger, and I quote, "I give him all due credit for being probably one of the smartest people in DHS, and he is the right guy to lead TSA." Is that accurate? You said that. Thank you.
ma'am.
You also stated in your transcribed interview, and again I quote, "Now, Pete Neffinger has stood up publicly and said, 'This is what we need to do,' but he is the only voice." Why is Admiral Neffinger the right guy to lead TSA? And what has Administrator Neffinger actually said that needs to be done at the TSA?
When I was the Deputy Assistant Administrator, I sat next to him probably 8 months as a member of the Counterterrorism Advisory Board. I know him to be an intellectual. I know him to be a leader. And when he was the Vice Admiral of the Coast Guard, he spoke truth to power. He talks now about innovation. He speaks with authority, and I think he's a man of integrity. What I don't think is he has a supporting cast around him. If you think of it as a sports analogy, he can't play every position on the field. I think he has good intentions for TSA. I think he needs a supporting cast to help him. I think all of you have heard him here when he's testified. I think he speaks honestly. I think he is well-intended. But what I think he needs is the people around him to buy into what he's doing. He has since hired a Chief Operating Officer, Gary Rascott, to come in and help him. That is one example of him trying to get things right. Congressman.
You also stated in your transcribed interview, again, I quote, "Here's the thing, the workforce is waiting out Mr. Neffinger because they think the elections are coming." Having worked in state government at various levels, I know what it is for people to wait for leadership to come in and then wait for leadership to come out, and they say, "We were here when you got here, we're going to be here when you leave." So are you speaking of those individuals that have some kind of, and I'm going to use this as a generalized term, civil service protection that can't be moved, that are representing the most difficult element to deal with and to work with?
Ma'am, my intention with that comment was to admit that the middle management and the senior level leadership hasn't provided the necessary leadership to support the administrator to let it be known that they've bought in, that no matter how long he's there, whatever he has said should be carried out. I don't think there's the necessary buy-in to carry out what he's advised and directed to be done, whether he's there a day or 4 years like Mr. Pistol. Once he decrees it, it should be carried out regardless of the time frame. That was my intent.
Do you think you could share with me some of the things you think need to be institutionalized under Mr. Neffinger's leadership that would help this agency as it may transition into new leadership under a new administration?
Yes, ma'am, I do. I think he's come out very specifically, and when he has his weekly staff meetings, he says he's interested in 5 things. He wants to know about how well we're doing in the airports with the pre-check. He wants to know about the acquisitions. He wants to know how we're doing with our budget. He wants to know how we're doing with the morale. He's very clear where he's going. He's very specific, and I can provide you that information very clearly.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I yield back my time.
Thank the gentlelady.
Thank you, sir.
Gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank each of you for your testimony here today, for your willingness on behalf of the American people to speak up. We know that it does not come without risk. And I, for one, am committed to making sure that all of our federal employees are treated fairly. And certainly when we see retaliation, it is troubling. Dr. Livingston, when I hear some of your testimony, I always watch the audience and I see people nodding their head yes or shaking their head that they can't believe these kind of things are happening. So let me just make sure that I'm clear. During your probationary period, were there areas where you were able to appeal to other like the special counsel? Did you appeal some of the decisions to those, or could you have appealed to those?
Sir, the rules from OPM is it's a one-year probationary. They have any right to terminate you for any reason, and under the current guidelines, there's no recourse. The problem is I was never told one time, either in writing or verbal, to adjust. What I do have is a record of 96 emails saying great job. What I do have is a midterm saying great job. There was no indication there was ever a problem. I was told on a Monday, great job over the weekend working for some work for the White House.
Right.
I was told Tuesday that you're being nominated for an award, and I was told Thursday you're done.
So now you do have a claim currently with OSC, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I have a petition with OSC, yes.
How about from an EEO standpoint? Do you have?
I have filed a lawsuit and an EEO as well, sir. And,
All right.
An attorney.
So you have those two appeals, I guess, sitting out there, or at least requests at this particular point. I just wanted to make sure that that's clear, that in addition to this probationary period, you've actually filed in those two areas. Is that correct?
It is the first time for me, sir, in 36 years, but I have.
No, then that's fine. You know, when injustice happens, or that perceived injustice, certainly we want to make sure that happen, that you are given the right to appeal. So let me go a little bit further, because part of this is a federal employee a management issue, but the American taxpayers probably are not as in tune to that or care about that as much as the safety and security of air travel.
Yes, sir.
So is it your testimony, Dr. Livingston, that this mismanagement is affecting the safety and security of Americans?
Sir, it's my testimony today that we have non-Intel professionals running your Office of Intelligence and Analysis.
So non-Intel running the Office of Intelligence, all right? Mr. Brainard, is it your testimony here today that the lack of sufficient management practices within TSA is putting Americans at risk?
Mr. Meadows, I would say that's the case, and let me quantify that. When I talk about the lack of experience in positions, right now this summer, we are going into what they call a very challenging season. And we are looking at situations in these airports where they have recently pulled out the Managed Inclusion 2 aspect of expedited screening. That is a very small part of that whole process and package.
Right.
And because they have done that, we're going to have this problem. The problem alone with that is the fact that Plan A was to put that in place, but nobody sat down and put a Plan B in place if they had to pull any one or all those options off the table. In this business, you have to understand continuity of operations, and it's very clear to me just on that alone, they didn't have a continuity of operation. That is detrimental to our security. Additionally, when you're talking about security at the airport, you're talking about things like this app, this randomizer. There are stories out this week about a proposal that existed pre-current administrator about not screening passengers on flights out of airports. To me, that speaks in and of itself, the level.
So your testimony is that correcting this situation is of the highest priority for the security of the American traveler. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
All right. So let me finish in the last few seconds. I was at Dulles a few weeks back visiting with Customs and Border Protection as we looked at the whole vetting of visa overstays and exit of the country. in there, they indicated that TSA doesn't check all the background areas of potential workers, so they can be on a terrorist watch list, they could have other backgrounds, and that we're not systematically checking all the backgrounds, resources that we have at our disposal. Is that correct, Dr. Livingston? And I yield back to the chairman.
Sir, let me research and get back to that. I'm not exactly sure of that. I think that's the case, but let me get back to you specifically. I don't want to mislead you on that, but I can find out.
Thank the gentleman. Gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Kelly, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the witnesses. Just for clarity, Mr. Rhodes, you told committee staff that after March 1st, 2015, no one has told you that they believe wait times are being falsified. Is that correct? Is that what you said to the committee staff?
Ma'am, I had described to the committee staff that in March 1st, 2015, that I was aware of an incident at Minneapolis where a manager was in our coordination center. He was counting the wait times of the people in the checkpoint queue, and he was pulled away to respond to a real incident at the airport. He had counted approximately 18 minutes. And then a new manager came in, and I believe she counted either somewhere around 5, but we reported 18.
So is that
So
a yes or no?
that's as best as I can tell is March 1st, 2015. But as I stated earlier, ma'am, when the airport police start having police officers count your wait time, it's an indication of trust. And so I would maybe look at that as the measurement, that when police organizations at airports are starting to count the wait times of your checkpoint security queue, then something's wrong.
But to that question, you don't have a yes or a no?
I don't have any information, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
In early 2015, the preliminary results of tests of TSA's screening operations conducted by the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General leaked to the press. The Inspector General made findings that, according to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, and I quote, "were completely unsatisfactory." In response to these results, Secretary Johnson ordered TSA to implement a 10-point plan. Mr. Brainard, are you aware of these findings?
I am, ma'am.
Okay. As part of the ongoing effort to complete the 10-point plan and resolve security vulnerabilities, Administrator Neffinger had worked to address what he identified as a, quote, disproportionate focus on efficiency and speed in screening operations rather than security effectiveness. To that end, Administrator Neffinger testified before this committee that he has provided new training to, quote, every transportation security officer and supervisor to address the specific vulnerabilities identified by the OIG test. Mr. Brainard, has your staff received this training?
Yes, ma'am.
You discussed the impact that this training has had on the performance of the screener workforce during your transcribed interview with committee staff. You stated, well, the Management Essentials training obviously has improved our situation in terms of how they conduct their jobs. The thoroughness, I mean. There have been improvements in terms of, I think, without seeing any test results, the detection capabilities. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Administrative Neffinger has also refocused the screener workforce on resolving alarms at checkpoints, and he testified, quote, readjusting the measurements. He is readjusting the measurements of success to focus on security rather than speed. When you spoke with committee staff, you were asked whether under Administrator Neffinger there had been a, and I quote, new emphasis on resolving the alarm, and you said, and I quote, absolutely. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
What is the importance of resolving alarms at the checkpoints?
Ma'am, making sure that our people are thorough. You know, the job that an officer does is certainly the most important job in TSA. And one of the hazards of that job is when you're constantly dealing with people all day and the routines are the same, it's very easy to get lax in procedures. And so part and parcel with that training, and I use that word culture, and I really mean that, is to improve our culture, to make sure that people understand the importance of resolving the alarm versus just clearing the passengers, letting them go. Also, part of that was to explain the limitations of the equipment that we had. You know, and these are all things that came out of the Tiger Team effort. Some great stuff that happened. And certainly since Mr. Neffinger has been in, there has been a shift to security and in trying to get that pendulum to go back so we strike a balance. But I'll offer to you this. the things we talk about, a lot of things we talk about happened prior to his administration. Those testing results, those aren't new. They may have been released, but the previous administration knows what our performance was, and they still implemented a number of different programs and processes, which in my opinion did not help our security situation. I've talked with the committee staff members about some other security concerns which have happened. All those things took place when they knew what the testing results were. As a federal security director, I see the testing results within my AOR. I see everything currently today within the state of Kansas. What I didn't see prior to that was everybody else's, but that leadership team did.
I just want to throw in one more question. What is the nature and impact of TSA's staffing shortages?
Say that again, ma'am.
What is the nature and impact of TSA's staffing shortages and amount of time after you answer?
That's a very good question, and I could sit here probably for the next 20 minutes and talk about it.
The chairman won't let you do that.
I know that he won't let me do that. So let me just say the most important aspect of this. You know, when we are not properly staffed, it causes our people to be under a lot more stress. Now, regardless of how much Mr. Neffinger or myself or our supervisors preach the importance of resolving the alarm, it puts pressure on the security checkpoint, the officers. Additionally, when you look in the media, you've got airports screaming about the possibility of going privatized. And if there's one thing that puts pressure on a federal employee of 13 years, is the threat of privatization. That is one thing that is absolutely at the forefront of their mind. And you can't have people focused on the security mission when they're focused on their job security. I give Mr. Neffinger a lot of credit because he's bearing the news to the public. And the word on the street is, you remember the day after Thanksgiving? That's going to be every day this summer. And so it's important for us to make sure that we reassure our officers that regardless of the fact that somebody's going to have to wait a few extra minutes, we still have their back. And we have an administrator who fully supports that. And that is part of the culture that he has established with TSA. That's a very difficult job. It's certainly not the most popular job, and we certainly appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, may I add one thing?
Yes.
We keep talking about the failures at the checkpoints, and candidly, I think that's insulting to TSOs because the leaders are what put the TSOs in that environment. And so, yes, they've got a difficult mission. Yes, we need to resource them, but let's not forget the fact that the people who brought us to the dance of the failures of the detection rate are still in leadership positions. And what training did they get? So again, we're deflecting the problem on the TSOs, but we're not really talking about all the people in leadership positions who brought them to that dance.
I thank the gentleman and yield now to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Warburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the panelists for being here. Mr. Livingston, we've been, of course, here today talking about failure at seemingly all levels in employee morale and training, et cetera. And the consistent terrible rankings that DHS has. What do you think it's going to take to instill a meaningful change in employee morale?
Leadership, accountable leadership that gets results, that's consistent, and that is honest, because right now there's no trust.
Accountable leadership, go back to that. What does that mean?
Well, right now, the value on conformity and silence is greater than integrity and innovation. If we don't have an agile agency that's more focused on the threat and making security the priority, you're not going to get an agency that's going to be agile. And right now, the agency is supposed to be working on the threat. And right now, we're more worried about conformity and silence. So I would tell you, if you don't build trust with the workforce, you're never going to make the morale better.
So the results that we're talking about today aren't a surprise to you?
Not in the least bit, sir.
Mr. Brainard, we've heard of senior positions being filled with unqualified staff, untrained staff, specifically individuals with little or no management or security experience. Can you share your experience in this regard, specifically whether you know of any efforts on the agency to address this issue?
Well, let me give you another example, and there are several. In 2013, an active shooter opened fire at the Los Angeles airport, killed one of our officers, wounded a total of 7 people. And in response to that, some of our senior leaders, these folks who have a questionable background and certainly lack the security experience necessary, all got together and decided to standardize a checkpoint panic alarm system. And the purpose of the alarm was to press it when there's an imminent threat so our people could have protection from law enforcement at the quickest possible opportunity. So of the 450 airports where they installed those, some 710 plus checkpoints, they installed those alarms. That's great. It's a good security move. The problem is they're all covert alarms. They've got an auto dialer that calls the police department. So if you have a law enforcement officer standing there and you have a situation like you did in New Orleans where a guy comes through the checkpoint chasing our people with a machete, if that officer hadn't been there to take that perpetrator out, several people would have been hurt or possibly killed that day. How do you install 710 alarm systems on a government contract and you forget to put in an audible alarm? We installed the audible alarm in our hub in Wichita, and we put out the specs to other federal security directors nationwide. That in and of itself, when you're talking about the changes that they put into these airports, I mean, there's the rationale behind some of this stuff absolutely makes no sense from a security standpoint. You know, risk-based security is a title that's slapped on everything. And the motto is, from the previous administration, there's never been a risk I wasn't willing to accept. It's like dealing with a financial investor. You give a financial investor $100,000 of your money, and he or she will do things with it they would never do with their own. That's one example of the logic that goes in and the thought process that goes in. One of my counterparts took a survey over a period of 5 months with calls that we have with TSA leadership prior to Mr. Neffenger's arrival. And over a 5-month period, there were 147 topics discussed. Not one of them was security related. They may have talked about playbook or they may have talked about some security aspect, but there was always a metric driving it. And it was a running joke. This is the priority of that leadership.
Okay, let me jump to another point here. Can you walk us through the process that TSA engages when they are evaluating a potential new hire?
At which level, sir?
At any level. A new hire at management level specifically, but any other. What's the process that TSA walks through?
Well, it varies, sir. You have, with officers, obviously, there's an online process, and locally, we're not involved in that. We'll do candidate assessments and so forth. There's a background checks conducted at the Federal Security Director. I don't get a lot of insight into that. At the administrative level, posting it on USA Jobs, whether it's internal and external, people apply for it. And then you have within the SES level, and those are done by the Executive Resource Council at TSA headquarters. The administrator is certainly involved in that decision. It just varies with different components.
Okay. Mr. Rhodes, complaints to leadership at TSA going unacknowledged, ignored, et cetera. Have you ever heard justification for these complaints not being accepted or reviewed?
No, sir, there's no logical explanation for that.
What explanations have been given?
Precisely, none.
None at all.
No contacts, no emails, no, Drew, you're nuts. I've got a differing opinion. Hey, that's a good idea. Nothing.
So it just happens and allowed to happen?
I can't answer that. The only thing I can answer, sir, is I've not been contacted.
Okay.
That's all I can answer.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the witnesses for helping the committee with its work today. In my previous life, I was a union steward and a union president, and then later on a labor lawyer practicing labor law on behalf of unions. I'm just curious, when I was a steward on the work site, when I had employees that were being treated unfairly, I would take it on myself. That would be my job. I would deal with management and make sure that people were being treated fairly. That way, my workers weren't continually banging heads with management. It was me. And I sort of enjoyed that work, but a lot of people don't. Would it be helpful at all in your workplace if you had somebody like that you could go to that would, I know that AFG is the signatory sort of representative in the workplace, but you don't have full bargaining rights and all the rights that the other federal employees have, so you don't have those. Would that be helpful?
Sir, I'd like to answer that. I'd like to first answer this by saying my AFG president from Minnesota is here in attendance in support of this testimony.
Great.
And I think the fact that she is here supporting me, talking about mismanagement in my agency is a powerful signal, hopefully, to my agency. I'll start off by saying this. My AFG president in Minneapolis and I sat in my office, The management wanted to fire this person because he made a mistake. And when I looked at the table of penalties, it was excessive. So what I did as what's called a designated grievance official is I reversed it. I eliminated it. We had a great conversation in my office, and I own the decision. And like I said, as long as you have ethical leaders willing to do the right thing and not be coerced from the top, it could work.
Yeah.
But it requires ethical leadership, sir.
No, I understand that.
And totally off topic, I grew up in Braintree, Massachusetts. Off
Oh,
Commerce
God bless,
Street.
that's my district. Yeah.
Yes, sir. And
You know, you're still voting there, you know.
I wish I could, sir.
Oh, you do? We just know how you'd vote anyway, so we do that on your behalf.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Just to you know, what do you think, Mr. Livingston?
Sir, the most important thing about TSA is the people and the mission. And if you don't make the two match, TSA is never going to get better.
Yeah.
We've got a great leader, but it's getting lost in translation.
No, and look, I got to tell you, I'm very happy to hear about Mr. Neffinger, and he's been before this committee. He's a frequent flyer, and he is trying to put in some of the changes that we need. I want to jump to something else, though. We did talk with Mr. Neffinger about look, checkpoints are very important.
Yes, sir.
I mean, all you got to do is, if you Google checkpoint bombings or what happened in Brussels, you know, you look what happened, you know, at the airport checkpoint, at the rail checkpoint, you know, suicide bombers detonating at both those. Look at Paris, outside the stadium where President Hollande was watching the game between France and Germany. Those suicide bombers hit at the checkpoint. So what goes on at that checkpoint is incredibly important. And we got to have a whole different strategy for how we handle that, because that's been the focal point of all these attacks. And you know, and I'm not calling out my TSA screeners, but you know, as the ranking Democrat on the National Security Subcommittee, I go to those classified briefings, and I saw what the Inspector General did. You know, sending people through with ace bandages, with knives in their ace bandages, or a gun strapped to their leg. And I got to tell you, like 90% of those folks got through, 90% of them. And these are major airports in our country. So I'm not looking to place the blame on any particular aspect of this, but that is unacceptable. So we gotta work together. And Mr. Neffinger has said he's going to go back and redesign this whole thing so that we'll do a better job at that.
Yes, sir.
But I cannot not criticize when we have a 90% failure rate. So that's got to change. But we get a lot of turnover. We get a lot of turnover, and I think some of that's related to the fact that we don't, the way we treat our employees. You know, this ought to be a profession, and these folks are doing incredibly important work. You know, people yell about protecting our borders. Well, that screener at that airport, that is your border. And you know, we got to make sure that those employees have the protections and the rights to be able to do their job. And one of the things I'm concerned about, and this is what I want to ask you about, my concern from a national security standpoint is whether or not those passengers are screened efficiently. The airline priority is moving people through that checkpoint and getting so many people. That's why you got these people being timed. Your screen is being timed on how many people, what's the wait time on getting these people through. Anybody who travels, and we all travel regularly, you gotta get there a little earlier, you gotta adjust your schedule so, you know, in case you do have, you know, an alert or something like that at the airport, and we want our screeners to do a damn good job. So the priority has to be safety and security and what's going on at that checkpoint. It can't be the airline needs to move product, needs to move people through that. So what do you think is winning out today between those two priorities, effective screening or moving passengers? What's the priority that's prevailing today in our nation's airports?
Sir, I don't speak for the agency, but I can tell you that we're not going to compromise security for speed. I can tell you that we're going to balance it. I tell you that TSA is not going to compromise our mission to expedite passengers through at the expense of our mission. What we're going to do is we're going to get better. We're going to keep pushing pre-check. We're going to keep pushing a better process, and we're going to get more people, and we're going to get better at this. Mr. Neffinger has made it a priority. There's a day that doesn't go by at TSA where this isn't a priority. I can tell you that every single senior leader that he talks to at TSA, this is a topic of discussion.
Okay,
I don't want you to think that it's not a priority,
okay,
but I got to go back to the original point I made earlier. He needs the right team to do it.
sure, sure.
Sir, if I can, as a federal security director, I work in a field operation, and I'm responsible for everything in the state of Kansas. Speaking for Kansas, I was at Maine last year, Iowa for 10 years before that, Indiana before that. And I can tell you there's a stereotype with the airlines that all they care about is customer service and throughput. That's not necessarily accurate.
Okay,
There are a number of airlines who partner with TSA successfully every day. There are a number of airports who partner successfully with TSA every day. The issue is that we are the only entity within the DHS that deals with three constants: departures, arrivals, connections. And when we're not doing our job as efficiently or as effectively as we can, they have a right to be upset about that, and we need to find a solution. The problem that we have right now is that the previous leadership team oversaw TSA put in a Plan A without a Plan B.
Yeah.
If we had the Plan B, we would not be here right now, and that's reflective upon that leadership. And I don't think there's a day that Mr. Neffinger doesn't come to work and just, he didn't get full disclosure when he took the appointment probably, and God bless him for being here. But he's out trying to cheerlead this. But that's why we're at where we're at, and it's the lack of experience within leadership that got us there. We did not have a Plan B when we put in Plan A.
okay. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your indulgence. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Let me turn to a gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rhodes, I believe you used to work alongside former acting head Ken
Kasprzyzyn, sir.
Kasprzyzyn, thank you very much, at Minneapolis, St. Paul. Mr. Kasprzyzyn has stated before that thousands of airport workers who are only subject to random checks are the single greatest threat to aviation security. Now TSA employees are regularly rooted out for being caught rummaging through baggage or for inappropriate behavior, which obviously it's good that we're catching them. But my concern is by the repeated reports that there are only 3 U.S. airports that currently require employee security checks: Atlanta, Miami, and Orlando. And in Atlanta, they had a major gun running operation busted in 2014. And additionally, we have reports that there are some 73 employees at about 40 airports who potentially have terrorist ties. At some point, is the TSA causing more insecurity than it solves? I mean, frankly, as a very frequent traveler, it gives me some concern that the screening process may identify potential terrorists, yet they continue to work there.
So let me try to answer that question, sir. I believe if the TSA was mandated to screen every employee at airports, it candidly would require much more resources. I'm unqualified to professionally comment on how much those resources will require, but what I can say is at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, there are, I believe, over 10,000 people that work at that airport. Now, obviously, some of them come during various times of the day and in various shifts, and certainly the insider threat has received a new focus based upon world events. What I will say is we are resourced in FTE based upon our mission, our baggage and passenger screening. Again, I'm unqualified to comment whether we should also receive resources in that, but I can say that's not our specific focus.
Let me put it this way. Obviously, we're talking about just some basic screening, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Every staff member that works here goes through screening to get into an office here. And in terms of, being able to do their job, if you know you have to go through a screening process, you show up early.
Yes,
is that unreasonable?
No, that's not unreasonable, sir. I think what our administrator has done, rightfully so, is focus is reducing some of those access points at those airports. And if you're aware of what's called SIDA badges and various access points, those are available to some employees. However, again, I don't have any data to suggest or talk intelligently with respects to how many access points. I can say at Minneapolis, the number of access points have been reduced, and we continue to reduce them.
Well, just think about it for a moment, that if we know the TSA thinks there's 73 potential people, employees potentially with terrorist ties, that's who they've identified, that there might be potentially others, and that we're not screening them, it doesn't give you a high comfort level.
I don't disagree with you, sir.
Mr. Brainard, I'd like to follow up on Mr. Duncan's questions regarding wasteful spending, in which you all described expenditures such as $330,000 spent on an absentee regional director in Minneapolis, St. Paul, a $12 million project that was over budget by 3 times its original amount. And I could almost ask for a hearing just on project overruns. $336,000 on an app that you, Mr. Brainerd, described as being as effective as an Ouija board in accomplishing its task. I'm sure the more we continue to hear from other employees at different airports, we're going to continue to hear similar stories to that effect. You might be aware that last April, the TSA Aviation Security Advisory Committee released a report concluding that they could not afford full employee screening and that it would not reduce the risk of overall public safety despite numerous voices from inside the TSA speaking out to warn of insider threats. Do you believe this illustrates where their priorities lie when you look at this other spending?
Thank you for the question, sir. Thank you for the question, sir. When it comes to spending, another example to give you where they could have put the money into toward making something like that happen. When they did the directed reassignments, I went from Iowa to Maine. I had received near perfect evaluation. There was no vacancy in Maine. The federal security director in Maine received a perfect evaluation. He was being sent to Wisconsin. Between the two of us, you're talking in excess of $250,000 just for the move that was earmarked for those 2 federal security directors. The FSD in Jacksonville got sent to Iowa. I was there. There was no vacancy. There was no reason to send it. All of these federal security directors were performing in excess of standards. No federal security director had more experience. The main operation, which was a wonderful operation, was smaller and less complex than what I had. The FSD in Wisconsin to Arkansas, the FSD in North Carolina to Los Angeles, his spouse from Los Angeles to Washington, the FSD in West Virginia to San Diego. There was no reason for these moves. I don't know what the price tag is on all those moves, but we could have certainly used that funding more appropriately.
Well, and that just brings me back to the point I was trying to make with Mr. Rhodes, that you're spending all this money, and we know that not every TSA employee is up to standard. I mean, potentially 73 may have terrorist ties, but we're spending all this money and we're not investing in the security apparatus that we need to make sure, absolutely, positively certain, that we have the very best people on the job and that we're protecting our airports. I saw you shaking your head, Dr. Livingston. I presume you may have a comment.
Sir, in full disclosure, just like my partner here to my left, we're from the same area as well. I'm from Prattville. I know you're from Clanton, so.
Well, actually, I'm from Hackleburg, Alabama, and I live in Hoover. And by the way, today is the 5-year anniversary of the tornadoes that went through Alabama with such devastating impact.
Wow, okay.
Thank the gentleman. Did you want to finish your response, Mr. Livingston?
Yes, sir. So to answer your question, sir, there needs to be greater oversight. I was part of the office that identified that original 73. We didn't have access to the list. I was actually part of the team that decided we needed to notify NCTC that we needed to generate a letter back to them to say we didn't have access to that database. I've also been part of the secure flight team that identified we needed to do a better job of screening. So there is an opportunity there to do better screening, and there's also a better opportunity for TSA to do better monetary discipline. I identified the $10 million excess spent on a watch floor. So yes, sir, there is an opportunity to be more prudent with the taxpayers' money. Anytime you see an example of waste, fraud, and abuse, we've got to do better. Yes, sir.
I thank the chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Livingston, TSA cut its screening staff over the past couple of years, anticipating that its pre-check program would help speed up the overall process, but not enough passengers have enrolled. News reports have indicated that morale inside the TSA is extremely low, which is likely a factor contributing to staffing shortages affecting TSA security. Reports indicate that travelers are arriving at security checkpoints where not all available queues are open for general screening. And I can attest to that going through St. Louis's airport. I'm part of the pre-check program, but it's more often than not, it's closed. And I'm told by officers that they don't have enough people to staff it. Is there a long-term strategy to fix the morale issue and the employment issue? I noticed, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, Congressman, there is a plan. I know that the administrator is touted the fact that we're putting 200 extra TSO officers through the academy each week. Both my counterparts here work in those airports that can speak directly to the screening process, but I can tell you from a pre-check standpoint, I know that we're putting more advertising out to get more people enrolled. We're dutiful trying to get more people into the program. We're trying to show them the advantages of that. Pre-check is a high priority for the agency, sir, and we're trying to get more people into that. Once we do that, the more people that are in pre-check, we think we can sustain that much better. And then I'll let my counterpart, sir.
No. Here's the point is that the excuse I get
Yes, sir.
at St. Louis Airport is we don't have enough officers to staff it. So, is that just something they're telling me?
Sir, there is a staffing issue, and I know the administrator has talked to OMB about staffing issues. I know that there is a long-term strategy to address that issue. It's a resource issue of both money and people. Turning the switch is going to take some time, but he has addressed that. I think he has a short and a midterm and a long-term plan. He's working with the senior staff around him to do that. And I think both of these gentlemen who are working in the airport can tell you what they're doing daily.
Some have suggested shifting officers from TSA's controversial behavior detection program to regular screeners. So let me go on. Mr. Rhodes, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Kind of concerned about this article I'm reading about a Mohammed Farah from Minneapolis. Are you familiar with him?
I am.
And he's an imam and part of an influential Somalian group. Here's what he says, that there's an ongoing pattern of racial profiling and harassment by TSA agents at the Twin Cities Airport. He said recently he was asked by an agent who says, quote, "Hey, were you going to make a run for it if I hadn't given your ticket back?" And the only response he's gotten from TSA and the congressman from that area, Mr. Ellison, is that they take these complaints seriously. Well, I think it's a little bit more than that. He's also been given a TSA control number from the agency's redress program, and he said it doesn't help either. So what can we do for Mr. Farah that would change the conditions that he experiences every time he goes through your airport?
Thank you for that question, sir. You may not realize, but there's a New York Times article that was published this morning about profiling. You may know that in my opening statement, I was asked to profile Somali imams and community members visiting me in my office. Those are facts. It's contained in my written mid-year evaluation that I provided to this committee. So, Mr. Mohammed Farah is the director of what's called Kajug. I was not at the checkpoint during that time, so I can't intelligently speak to what was or was not said. What I can say is whether you're black, white, male, female, Somali, Jew, Christian, Hindu, we should treat you the same. And it doesn't matter if you're flying on whatever airlines, you should be treated with respect. Again, I'm not either taking Mohammed's position or refuting his position, in so much as I'd to say that when we get to know people of the Somali community, they're hardworking. They want to be American citizens. My mother was an immigrant. My mother was a Japanese national, became a U.S. citizen, and took her oath of citizenship in Boston, Massachusetts.
Well, how are you going to change Mr. Farah's experience when he encounters your agents, your officers?
The best way I can answer that, sir, is like any investigation or inquiry, you get the facts. I have met Mohammed Farah many times. We can, at times, have what's called a passenger support specialist, have someone assigned to him in the future when he flies out to make sure things like that don't happen. And we're happy to do that.
Have you disciplined the officers that he has encountered?
I don't know the names of the officers, candidly, sir. I'm unqualified to speak to that. So I don't have that information with me.
Your camera footage can identify them. I mean, you have identified these officers.
Again, sir, I don't have those facts. What I am suggesting is, in my own experience with respect to the TSA, they've been less than forthcoming in addressing my complaints. So I would say that my complaints mirror Mohammed Farah's.
This is totally unacceptable.
Sir, has somebody from TSA gotten back to you with these questions?
No, I'm just reading it today and realizing this guy's being mistreated here.
Would you like for somebody from TSA?
Sure, I certainly would.
I'll take that as an action, sir, and get back to you with somebody from TSA, sir.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
No problem. I thank the gentleman, and you'll get hopefully a response. Let me recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. We appreciate your presence here today. I want to start with you, Mr. Brainard, if that's okay. As I understand it, at one point you were assigned in Iowa, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
In the Midwest, and while you were there in Iowa, you received the highest performance rating that you could possibly receive while you were working there, and also I believe that you received the Federal Security Director of the Year Award.
Yes, sir. I've received the Federal Security Director of the Year, Secretary's Team Award, the Gail Recides People First Award, which is one of the two top awards you can receive in our agency, and a number of other types of awards from local stakeholders, partners, fusion centers, things like that.
Right, okay. Well, then, as I understand it, they tried to reassign you to Maine?
Yes, sir.
They tried to reassign you to Maine after
They did reassign me to Maine.
They reassigned you to Maine after you received all these accolades and all these awards?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that that was their way of trying to get rid of you, to reassign your position?
Well, I can't speak to their motives. It would be unfair for me to speak to their motives. I'll speak to facts.
Was it a bigger airport? Were you needed there? Or
No,
what?
sir. It was a smaller airport, less complex, fewer employees, fewer airports.
Why would an agency take one of their best employees? Obviously, they wouldn't have given you these awards if they didn't think you were doing a good job, and put you at a smaller airport where your skills and your abilities would not be as useful.
Because according to them, the reason for the directed reassignment was because my skill set was needed for that particular operation. Unfortunately, there was another federal security director who had the same length of service in that I did and who would have been a high performer. That's the reason they provided. Each of the federal security directors, who happened to be the longest serving federal security directors in TSA, there was a caveat. There were at least 3 federal security directors that I was aware of that they did not move, but they had to sign an agreement to stay at their duty station 1 year, and then they would retire, and they forfeited their right to take any type of litigation against the agency. So
Okay.
three people were provided an exemption with the caveat that they had to retire. July, right after that came, I think this bears worth mentioning, there was a VERA announcement which reminded everybody that putting pressure or coercion on employees to retire is a prohibited practice.
Okay, well, let me ask you, if you had and you did relocate to Maine?
Yes, sir.
When you relocated to Maine, was that a financial hardship on you?
Oh, yes.
And your family, I can assume it was.
Yes, sir.
Okay, was there a vacancy near where you were before, or?
No, there was no vacancy. There was in Maine a sitting federal security director. There was no vacancy. And if there had been a vacancy, there were certainly other people there at the operation qualified to fill these positions. It's important to note that when you're moving this particular skill set around the country, we have some 750 assistant federal security directors and deputy federal security directors. And the men and women that fill those positions, most of them are more than qualified to fill those positions.
Well, let me ask you, how much would it have cost TSA to relocate you to Portland, Maine?
They earmarked on the PCS moves in excess of $100,000.
I've got down here in my notes $113,000.
That would be accurate.
130. Is this happening elsewhere? Does this happen, Mr. Rhodes?
Sir, it happens everywhere. As you may read in my written testimony, I'd like to call the example of Mark Haught. This was a gentleman who was moved from Charlotte to Los Angeles. When he moved from Virginia over to Charlotte, the agents paid him $197,000 for one move. During that time, 2 of his sisters and his brothers died. His wife, after he got a directed reassignment to Los Angeles, was given a directed reassignment in Los Angeles back to Washington, D.C., on the opposite end of the United States. That's the punitive nature of directed reassignments and the high cost.
Let me make sure I'm understanding this now. So this is taxpayers' money that we're paying this.
Yes, sir.
So we could potentially be talking about millions of dollars in taxpayers' money to put.
You are talking about millions of dollars.
And not only that, but it also causes the employee financial hardship.
I'll offer you this. When they moved me to Iowa, my counterpart in Jacksonville couldn't come. He didn't come to Iowa. He was off on medical. So you know what they did? They TDY'd an assistant federal security director in Iowa, put that acting federal security director in a hotel for 9 months. 9 months. They put her in that hotel for 9 months, and they didn't fill that position until January of 2015.
Sir?
Go ahead.
Ed Goodwin from Florida. He was given a directed reassignment. He was supposed to replace Jay Brainard in Des Moines, and his parents were 89 and I believe 95 years old. One of them had Alzheimer's. His daughter was a high school senior in her last year of high school, and he was underwater in his mortgage, and they gave him a directed reassignment. You know what he did? He quit. He resigned. And that's what and the New York Times wrote about him as well. That's what our agency does to people they want to run out.
Okay, well, we've got a number of moving parts here. You know, we've got what I consider to be wasting taxpayers' money that I'm very concerned about. We've got another concern about whether this is intentional and in a way to get rid of employees or to discipline employees. Mr. Chairman, I just have to tell you, I'm pretty disgusted right now, and I'm looking forward to us having another hearing. From what I understand, we're going to be doing that. And certainly, we want to get to the bottom of this. Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. Thank you all again for being here.
Yes, sir.
Thank the gentleman. I'll recognize the delegate from the district, Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I just say to all 3 of you that we very much appreciate your service and appreciate your courage in coming forward. I chair the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I'm very interested in this kind of alleged retaliation. It's interesting that when Congress passed Title VII itself, it passed a retaliation provision in the statute. It's very, very important. And of course, if there isn't any sense that one cannot be punished for coming forward, it is a very, very, very heavy presumption against coming forward. So I was interested to hear about it. Was not when I was in, I don't remember, even though I had to essentially reform the entire agency, creating new parts of the agency, bringing together people. I don't remember anything called directed reassignments. In my view, I can think of no more powerful instrument in the hands of an agency. You testified, I think it was you, Mr. Rhodes, about somebody just quit.
Yes, sir.
And if that was the intention, it certainly worked. Mr. Livingston, let me just start with you, because you reported that you indeed did suffer discrimination at TSA. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And what was the basis for the discrimination?
It started with the disability harassment, and then it was based on my veteran status. They were making fun of me for my service-connected disabilities. Then it started with as the management-directed official in a case for EEO, I found against the senior SES for pre-selection. Then it started with the sexual harassment. Another SES asked me to lie, and I refused. And then there was another case where I've reported serious security violations, and it started, that same official is the one that testified against me in my ERC, or my probationary period.
All right, this seems like one thing leads to another.
If you tell the truth in TSA, you will be targeted. I call it the Lord of the Flies. You either attack or be attacked.
Ma'am, if I may?
Yes.
I was accused of going native.
Going what?
Going native.
You'll have to explain that, sir.
Ma'am, it's a slang term where I was visiting mosques in my official role, working with the Somali community, where Jay Johnson, my secretary, tells me he wants me to conduct community outreach, and my supervisor accused me of going native. I take that to mean I'm somehow converting to Islam. I'm acting as a native. It's a disgusting, bigoted term. And when I think of that within the context of my written mid-year evaluation that tells me to profile Somali people, I'm disgusted by it. Going native, I'm truly disgusted by it.
Now, this committee has, I think, and indeed I think the House has unanimously passed a bill called the Federal Employee Anti-Discrimination Act to help hold managers accountable. You know, it's the kinds of retaliation that would happen below your level perhaps is apparently better taken care of. Now, as original co-sponsor, it looks like most of the committee was. This bill, by the way, is pending in the Senate. It hasn't passed the Senate yet. But it would require the agencies to keep track of every single complaint. To somehow, for the string of issues, Mr. Livingston, for example, you indicated there would have to be a tracking of the complaint through inception and resolution. Do you think this would help bring some additional level, Mr. Livingston, any of the three of you? I'll start with you, Mr. Livingston.
Yes, ma'am.
To the process?
Yes, ma'am. I think anytime there's checks and balances and you track that, I think that's always a good thing.
See if something funny is going on here. With the string of, if you see the string of...
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I think TSA has a management protocol problem. I think if you can track and show the process, and I know that this committee has looked at it for years, I think if you can show that, because all these leaders are not bad. Some are very good, exceptional. I can name several. But all it takes is somebody to circumvent that process, and now you've ruined the good work of many. But if you track that and you quantify it, and you can show the progress of the well-intended, I think everybody benefits. If you have toxic, cancerous leaders that are injected into this process, it undoes all the good work that the well-intended leaders do. And that's why Mr. Neffinger needs a team around him that can do that. And this process that you're talking about, this tracking, this mechanism, the numbers and the data doesn't lie. And it's forever. Once you put it into the record and once you track it, it's consistent over time. And that's what we need. It's consistent, persistent, quality leadership, because factual data will make us better.
Yeah, and Ms. Livingston, they gave me something of what you said to staff, indicating that these non-disclosure agreements stand in the way. I notice, and of course, I'd like to know whether you think our bill that says that you can't restrict the employee from disclosing waste, fraud, or abuse to the Congress, a special counsel, or the Inspector General, whether that reaches far enough.
I think we overuse the non-disclosure agreements in my agency. I think every legal case we have ends in one, and I think that's an abuse of the power that we have. I did write a statement to that. I will look for it very quickly and read it to you. Every case from a misconduct to an EEO case ends in an NDA. That hides the potential to make us better, And at worst, it shows our problems. And at the least, it shows a cover-up. Every case can't be an NDA. We should have public disclosure. We should show the public what we're doing, and if we're hiding it, we're hiding something.
I thank the gentleman, and we'll recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney.
I thank the chairman, and I wish that Mr. Lynch had stuck around for just a few minutes, because he said something, and I thought Mr. Brainard handled it very well. But I'll go back just for the record and say I think Mr. Lynch mentioned at the end that the airlines were just interested in moving product, moving people through the room. And I think, Mr. Brainard, you handled that extraordinarily well. I think that's unfair. I know the folks who work, some folks who work there, and their families fly, their friends fly, and they care just as much about safety as we do. It's probably just as inaccurate to say that the airlines only care about moving product as it would be to say that all you care about is safety, and that you don't care about the folks who have to stand in line and how long they do. In fact, I look forward to a longer conversation with Mr. Lynch another time as to who cares less about people, a corporation or a bureaucracy. My guess is they're probably tied. But I want to get back to the purpose of the hearing, which is to talk a little bit about the way that the employees are treated. And I just have to ask, and I don't really answer this question, is anybody familiar with the circumstance that happened in Charleston, South Carolina with a Miss Kimberly Barnett? Does that name ring a bell for anybody?
No, sir.
Just an example of exactly what we've talked about here today. She complained about her supervisor falsifying records in her area. Her area dealt with the canine user, the dog. And that she went to the OSC, which is where she was supposed to go, and made the complaint in June of 2014, and by November of 2014 she was fired. She was fired over a completely different allegation regarding using inappropriate language when her car got struck by a bus. So I wanted to mention her because it's more than just you gentlemen. We've heard your stories, but I think everybody from every one of our districts could bring some of these stories in. But let's talk about how to fix it, and if it can be fixed. Because Mr. Livingston, I think you hit the nail on the head, which is your exact language was accountable leadership, which I agree with. Can you name for me a federal agency that has that?
I used to work at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and I thought they had great leadership. I've worked at the Department of the Navy. I thought they've had it.
And they may have. All I can tell you is maybe it's just a function of what we do in this committee, but since we see the bad stuff all the time, we can tell you that again and again and again we can bring in examples of leadership breaking down, leadership not being accountable, of folks not being able to fire people. You could have a hearing here every single day on how poorly the VA is run for the very same reasons. You mentioned one of the challenges that the agency faces is personnel.
Yes, sir.
And then I think you said that it was staffing and that it was money, but I feel it's incumbent upon me to point out that we haven't cut your budgets. Your budgets have been fairly flat for the last couple of years. So when you tell me that every day this summer is going to be like the day after Thanksgiving is, why is that? It can't just be money. In fact, it can't be money because we really haven't changed the money that much. I'll give both you gentlemen a chance to answer that.
We are in a perpetual human resource model where we are always recruiting and losing people. We don't have a sustainable model where we recruit and retain and promote the best workforce. If you don't sustain top quality people, then you're not going to get the best workforce. If we're always recruiting because we're always losing, you're not going to get the best people. If you don't take care of the people that you hire, they're not going to stay. If you don't take care of the people that you hire and get them into a career development leadership program, and if you don't take your best people and groom them for bigger, better positions, if you don't send them to the top level schools, and if you don't invest in them, if you don't make people feel important, and if you don't make people feel like you care about them, they're not going to stay no matter where they are.
I tend to agree with that. In fact, I agree with that wholeheartedly. In fact, anybody here who has ever had to hire or fire people or run an organization, public or private, probably agrees with that statement.
It's not money, sir. It's concerned, caring leadership. If people think you care about them, they'll take a bullet for you.
I absolutely agree, which leads me to my real question here. Why are we doing this? You've just described the same challenge that a private entity has in running this operation. You described some of the same frustrations that we have with so many bureaucracies. The stories that you guys have told about whistleblowers getting fired, about not being able to deal with malperforming employees, about unaccountable leadership, we hear that in here every single day from every single agency that we bring in. So my question is, why are we doing this? Why wouldn't it be better to let private services serve this function? Why are we doing this? Can you defend the agency as to why the federal government needs to be doing this? Because it strikes me that if y'all were contractors, because we have had contractors come in here before, Mr. Chairman, and there's always the threat hanging over a contractor, which is we just fire them. We don't renew the contract. We don't have that with the TSA. So I guess I ask you to defend the federal role here. Why are we doing this as a federal government as opposed to letting the private sector serve this need? Mr. Rhodes?
I'd like to take a stab at that, sir.
Sure.
I think one of the essential elements of a government is to protect its people. That's why you have a standing army. I grew up as an Army Ranger, and a Ranger lives and breathes. A leader is responsible for his or her unit. He or she is responsible for everything that unit does or fails to do. And when there are failures, there must be consequences to those failures. We don't have consequences to our failures in TSA. If this would have happened in the military, entire people in the chain of command would have been relieved of
And if a
command.
private sector company came to us with a 90% failure rate, we would fire them and replace them with somebody else.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. But I'm to suggest that whether it's private, whether we're Title V, whether we stay under ATSA, in my view, is irrelevant. It requires the most essential ingredient in a private company, and I work for Kraft Foods in marketing, and that's leadership. I know it's the intangibles, but that's why we're all here, because there's failures in leadership. It's failures of accountability, failures of a performance, but there's been nothing done. And that's why we're here.
And maybe my frustration, I will cut you off, Mr. Brainard, because I'm over time and I don't want to take away from Mr. Grothman, but that frustration is embodied and experienced in this committee every single day.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the indulgence.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Grothman, you're recognized.
We'll start with Mr. Livingston. Here on the sheet they give us, they call you Dr. Livingston.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Think about that. Okay. Are you aware of examples of an OOI investigation that you believe was used specifically to remove anybody from an agency? Do you think any specific examples?
Well, I know that the morale survey that was used against me was tainted. I know that the OI investigation that was used against an FSD in Miami was used as an instrument to thwart a complaint. I know those are two examples.
And what do you do that you get yourself in trouble that they go after you?
Anytime you go against the grain or you report misconduct or you tell on certain favorite people, if you do anything that goes against the favorite people, if you report misconduct, if you report sexual harassment, if you report security violations, if you do anything against the top tier or anything of that nature, it just seems to go against the grain. You identify yourself as a non-player. If you don't shut up, you don't move up.
Okay, so in other words, the mentality is not to do the best job that they can at what TSA should be doing. The idea is to establish kind of a respect for the people at the top.
Yes, sir, and I come from a DOD background where everything is a learning opportunity. We always do a hot wash after we have an exercise or an incident or a crisis. We always learn from that mistake, and everything is integrity-based. If you don't say something, you're considered a weak leader. And I think the opposite in TSA, if you say something, you're considered an outsider. When I reported sexual harassment, I had another SES say, hey, if she files a complaint, it's our word against hers. And I said, no, I'm not going to lie. And he says, well, if you don't, we can't work with you. And if you're going to be a Boy Scout, you'll be on my blank list. So obviously, I was on the outside from the get-go. I was stunned that another SES would ask me to lie. And then when I didn't, I was an outcast.
Because you saw something happen and were going to report it?
Absolutely, and I did.
Just a horrible mentality. Okay, we'll give Mr. Brainard and Mr. Rhodes a question. Could one of you give a background kind of on how integrity tests are conducted at the airports?
So I can give you some insight. Integrity testing in TSA went into high gear shortly after media story about iPads were taking place, and our TSA Office of Inspection, otherwise known as Internal Affairs, will come out and they will run test items through cash cards, money, DVDs, colognes, and things like that. And so the testing items, they come out, they conduct the integrity test. When they conduct the integrity test, they'll come through with these items, and then the Federal Security Director will get a call, and we will be notified of the outcome. Generally speaking, they'll say, we came through with X, Y, and Z items. Can you recover them for us when they're turned into lost and found? I will give you an example, which I think that you certainly will appreciate. One of the items that they're notorious for planting in an airport are pens. They'll throw a pen on the floor, let's say in queue, and TSO picks it up and doesn't turn it in. They'll fly back out, a couple of investigators, and they'll literally interrogate them and push for a resignation, or they'll propose removal for theft, for a pen. And I know this because they've done it in my airports. I know this because they've joked about the fact that it's the most successful test they have. There was a TSO at an airport in the Midwest who, when he picked up the pen, threw it in the garbage because he didn't put any intrinsic value with the pen, didn't think it was worth any money. It's a $200 Mont Blanc pen. In my operation, I happen to be one of the worst offenders of picking up pens that people are using. But the irony in all this, when you're talking about testing, is that you hold the people in the field to the highest standard, the people at headquarters to the lowest standard. We've got people who are picking up pens, and they're sending out these criminal investigators for non-criminal matters. And oh, by the way, it's commonplace for them to come out and threaten people with criminal prosecution. As a matter of fact, they'll take a non-criminal case to a local prosecutor as part of the TSOI Fairness Act to say that they're spending 50% of their time on criminal investigation so they can check that box. And they take and hold the field to a much different standard of accountability. They're doing people for pens, while you've got people at our headquarters that are abusing their staff members.
So in other words, just kind of for kicks, they put a stupid plastic pen on the ground, and if somebody... It's
a Mont Blanc pen. It's a metal pen. I mean, I can go to CVS and get something that looks just like it, and I couldn't tell the difference between that and a $7 pen. I've never in my 13 years seen a passenger go and turn a pen into lost and found at an airport. I'm sure it may have happened at some point, but if that's just not the most ridiculous use of the taxpayers' money, I don't know what is.
Okay. And do you think when they do these tests, you think they ever target individual employees or individual airports, or is there...
No, I believe that the tests, I've never seen any indication that the tests are conducted for any particular reason.
Okay. Just kind of a general waste of time.
I think that portion of the test is, I think that the integrity testing is absolutely essential. You know, one of the things, and I know you know this, the only people that hate to see thefts in the workplace more than the American public are our own employees. We don't want them working for us any more than the public does.
Okay, thanks for the extra time.
Thank you. Let me yield to Ms. Norton, and, or let me yield to Mr. Cummings, and then he's going to yield to Ms. Norton.
First of all, I'm going to have to go to another meeting, but I want to thank you all for being here. You've provided some very significant testimony. I think we need to, you know, as I said earlier, I think we need to see the entire picture. But we certainly cannot have a situation where whistleblowers even worry about retaliation, let alone be the victims of it. I think you'll get that concern from both sides of the aisle. And so, again, I want to thank you all. And we got to find a way to cut out that layer that you're talking about, those people who seem to want things to go on the way they've been going on, and the way they've been going on is not healthy. And it takes away from the morale of the agency, and it takes away from its effectiveness and efficiency. And this whole idea, and I know Ms. Norton is going to explore this, but this whole idea of people being sent from one part of the country to another, and if that's about retaliation, I'm going to tell you something. To me, that's criminal. I mean, I really, because families are so important, and the individual those families who have to go through that hell, you know, your wife's on one end and your husband's on the other, and life is short. And so, but anyway, I'll yield to Ms. Norton. And thank you.
Yes, sir.
I thank the ranking member for those comments. I just wanted to make sure I understand the difference between the legitimate use of a tool for management and its abuse. And I had asked you before about these directed reassignments, and I can see how it opens itself hugely for abuse, and noted that apparently, and it's interesting, we passed the bill, but it looks like internally the agency has begun to take some action because it became apparently so open and such a problem within the agencies. I want to ask, particularly, I asked about the directed reassignments. Now, here's a legitimate tool. I just want to know if it's been misused, because we see this tool all across the government, and this is the capacity of the agency to ask the employee to move every 4 years. Now, we see that, I mean, we see the State Department, we see it in the Armed Services of the United States. I'm sure I see it because I see very often a different person from the National Park Service. But I note that a former, I think this is a former administrator of TSA, suspended the tour of duty initiative, whereby the FSDs would be moved every 4 years. Why would he do that?
So if I can take that, you're speaking of Mr. Mel Carraway. Mr. Carraway was the acting administrator for about a minute in between the transitions. Mr. Carraway not only saw the detrimental effect that it had on the culture of our workforce, he'd also been subjected to it himself. So he'd walked that mile. Mel's a good man. And Mel suspended that practice. And when Mr. Neffinger came in during his October Leadership Summit of 2015, he reaffirmed to hold what Mr. Carraway had done. So I'm not sure if they've tried to do it since Mr. Carraway put a freeze on it, because sometimes there are things that go on you don't find out till the bell's been rung. But Mr. Carraway did freeze that process. He saw the problem with it, and anybody would. When you sit down and look at the information, it is crystal clear. It's blatant. It's obvious.
So it was a problem in that agency. I indicated that TSA is not unusual in having this this tour of duty.
It actually
notion.
is. It actually is. Last year, when I hired in as a federal security director right after 9/11, I did not sign a mobility agreement. Okay.
What kind of agreement?
Mobility agreement. So
mobility agreement.
Mobility agreement. The SCS.
So you don't have to sign it.
Do not. The SCS signs a mobility agreement. The TSA Office of Law Enforcement signs a mobility agreement. The Senior Leadership Development Program, if you want to be a candidate, you sign a mobility agreement. But there is no tour of duty on that. What they did is they established a mobility process with the federal security directors and then just started moving them around. And they didn't have a business reason to do it, regardless of what was put in there. And that's we're certainly able to articulate that.
Mr. Rhodes?
Ma'am, Mr. Brainard had talked how Mel Carraway suspended tour of duty links initiative. That happened in November 2014. I received my directed reassignment February 19th.
So that's different from tour of duty.
You're just calling the same thing a directed reassignment. What's probably important for the committee to understand, on the night of February 19th, 2015, my former federal security director, Ken Kasprzyzyn, called Mel Carraway on his cell phone. I was in his house. I heard every word Mel Carraway said. Rhodes shouldn't have gotten that directed reassignment. I suspended that action. That did not go through what's called the Executive Resource Council. So it goes back to the point that I want to reinforce here. We can have all the policies we want written down, but if we're going to ignore them or work around them or lie about them, then it's ineffective.
So, so you can call it a tour of duty reassignment. You can call it a directed reassignment. Look, I'm pleased that my friends and colleagues on the other side have the same view about the kind of minimal protections that even at your level that civil servants have. I do note that though we passed, and I'm so pleased we passed a bill ourselves, which is waiting for the Senate. You know, it didn't take a bill to do something about this. I noted that on March 24th of this year, apparently the President Administrator, a detailed explanation of why this employee must be reassigned involuntarily versus any other options. Any other options, it seems to me, is important for this employee and/or the new position. Does that help this situation?
I think, you know, this is a question of using policy in such a way that you can push an agenda that's not healthy for the organization, there would be legitimate reasons why you might do a directed reassignment. You may have somebody who is not performing well. You may have hired the wrong person for the position. You may have somebody who's abusive to the workforce. You may not be able to terminate somebody. They may not have reached that level, but you are prepared to sit down and have an options meeting and say, look, we need to talk about the road ahead, and you being at this location is not going to work. There are circumstances where you would do a directed reassignment, and I think that there is some legitimacy to that. And this goes back to, do you have a policy in place that governs this? And if there is, are people manipulating the policy? I'll tell you a comment that I heard, and I'll say it in this hearing because there were about 300 witnesses to it on a conference call from the previous Deputy Administrator, Mr. Helinski, when they were talking about ethics and accountability, and he said to take action and let them file a lawsuit. I've got 300 attorneys, and I'll tie them up forever in court. That's the mentality that these people have. They feel that they're bankrolled by the federal government to make these decisions. They don't care if you're going to file an EEO. They don't care if you contact the OIG. It's very difficult to get the OIG or OSC to accept a complaint. There needs to be legitimacy with this, and that's what these types of moves are absent.
In my case, when they ended my probationary, the argument was made they had no proof, and they said, don't worry about it. Let them file a complaint. We'll outlast them.
I certainly hope, Mr. Chairman, I very much appreciate your indulgence, because I certainly, as I said, our committee moved unanimously and the House moved unanimously on this. Of course, the nuances are quite different. This is where the agency itself, with this detailed explanation, if you really hold people accountable, let's put it in writing. Of why the employee must be reassigned. I particularly like the part that says, look, let's what the options are. Instead of uprooting you, let's see what the options are. And there may be no option. I must say, Mr. Brainard, I particularly appreciated your explanation because you seem to understand that there are some reasons for these policies, and that what we're here discussing are not the reasons that are used across the government, but the abuse of these policies in TSA in particular. And I thank you very much for your testimony.
I thank the gentlelady. I want to conclude, and I thank all the members for their participation. Particularly grateful for you all coming forward. As I said earlier, I think you've confirmed some of our worst suspicions of what we have heard was going on, and it takes some brave people to come forward, especially from an agency that is renowned for retaliation, has grown renowned for gagging its employees, and those who step forward and have reported some of the problems are paying some pretty high penalties. It's abusive to you. It's abusive to the system. I was one of the people who created TSA way back after 9/11 as the chair of Aviation Subcommittee. President wanted it on his desk by Thanksgiving, and we did that. We tried to structure something that would replace what we had. First of all, I think that there should be a federal responsibility, and all of you agree to that. We changed from having the airlines and the private sector just do, well, there weren't federal guidelines in place, and they failed to put them in place. So I think that's important. I've never said do away with it. I've said change the role. The most shocking testimony or thing I heard today was there's the abuses and what they've done to you all is uncalled for, horrible. But one of you, was it Mr. Livingston, talked about the intel and analysis capability.
Yes,
See,
sir.
That really scares me. The most important responsibility of that agency is to connect the dots. The intel and analysis is all that's going to save us, in my opinion. I will probably I'm going to ask the administrator to take action to revamp that activity. That is the most important government responsibility. The intelligence gathering, the information, all of the stuff we need to keep people from doing damage to us. And when you come and testify to me and you're familiar with it, that's one of our weak spots. Is that correct again, Mr. Livingston?
Yes, sir.
That to me is absolutely scary. To help put this system together, have tried to help TSA when it failed. I mean, we did everything from Washington. That was a disaster. We have tried to localize some of the hiring and other activities. The problem is it's so big, they can't think out of the box, and you have people who you identified today in control. You can have the administrator, but you've got other people in control who are revengeful, who have taken actions that are just unacceptable. I can see replacing, if there's a vacancy and you have to move somebody to fill that vacancy, and we've got to secure that important FSD position, so be it, and if there's compensation needed to move that person. But what you've described is just an abuse of authority today. And then the cost is, you said $197,000 on one of them. It's just unbelievable. So the intel bothers me. I'll be writing Neffinger. He's coming in. We have got to get that piece of the puzzle there. I don't care who you put there, private screeners, public screeners, whatever it is, things will get through, okay? The system is human beings. But when you fail, well, if we'd spent some of that money in looking at people who pose a risk, whether they're even screening people who are working behind the scenes. We had a hearing on that. There are hundreds of people, they don't have a passport number, they don't have Social Security numbers for folks, not all TSA folks, but even with TSA, they haven't screened some of those people. The Miami and Orlando, and there's one more airport where they're screening the workers, that's a waste of money. That's not the way you do it. They check them, and they can go through, as you know, and once they're into the secure, they have hammers, they have knives, they have all kinds of things that are not allowed, and they have chemicals and everything else, plus they have access to the aircraft, which they could do a lot of damage to. So we waste money. That's congressionally imposed, some of that, where it could be better spent. So, would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let me just say one thing, too, and I'm glad that some of the union folks came. I'm a Republican. When I wrote the bill, I made certain that the TSA and TSOs had the ability to belong to a union. I strongly believe in that right of every American worker. I don't think anyone should be forced to join a union, on the other hand. But we put that in the provision, the 5 of the 5 private screening under federal supervision operations that we set up. San Francisco was private, has been union from the beginning, long before you got the rest of the crowd got that. So it's not a question of union representation, and I don't think people should fear public versus private, even the TSA folks. I know some of them fear that, but it does involve some competition, and I heard you all speak to that, and Mr. Lynch isn't here, but again, we need to protect that right. We exempted them from Title V, and some can get fired because that's the way we set it up. It sounds like some of the wrong people are getting removed, and the money is going to the wrong folks. In the private screening, they've actually increased some of the compensations for the TSO to retain better people and be more flexible in scheduling and things like that that can be adaptive. That's one reason I favored that model under federal supervision. What you described today is very scary. I cited all the history of what's been going on with the delays. But for you to come here, you said, Mr. Rhodes, Mr. Livingston, Mr. Brainard, that was no plan B and that we expect a meltdown this summer. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Rhodes.
Yeah, if I can say something with that.
Go ahead.
You know, federal security directors are working with their staff, are working with the airports, are working with the airlines. We have faced tougher challenges in our history standing up, as you well know, as one of the founders of our agency. I'm confident that we're going to be able to find workable solutions as long as we're keeping partnerships with our stakeholders. So,
Well, then you've got a lot of good workers out there, too,
Absolutely.
who should be rewarded. We need a better way of rewarding and retaining the good TSO workers, get rid of some of the bureaucrats at the top who are causing most of the problems. And I guess over the years, they felt threatened, particularly by me, because I keep saying, my goodness, we've got this huge bureaucracy, many of them just a few miles from here, and they're very domineering over the bureaucracy and anyone who gets in their way. I dealt with them in privatizing one of my airports. I've always left that option open. One of my local airports requested to opt out, and then they came down, and he told me he'd never been so intimidated, so threatened. It took 2 years to just get us to get consideration of the opt-out, and then I had to change the law to where they must accept the application rather than when we set it up, it was left permissive with a language shall. So that's the reason that we got into that situation. Then it took 2 years more while they thwarted our Congress's intent. Again, we have 450 airports. We need different models. Alaska is different from Wyoming, is different from JFK, et cetera. And the flexibility to do that with the right balance of public-private operations and but I'd never take the federal government out. And again, the people, there are a lot of junior members here. Nobody understands the significance of what you confirmed today on this intel and analysis situation, because that is the only thing I think that will save us. I don't, maybe have a different opinion, Mr. Livingston.
No, sir, and I just want to go on the record saying, while you don't have Intel leadership, you do have some top quality Intel professionals working in that office. The advanced analytic part that I brought in is still functioning very effectively, and I think Mr. Neffinger is going to tell you that he's getting some great Intel support from them. But with the right Intel leadership, it'll continue to function even better.
Well, I would put the resources there. The BDOs have been, we've suggested it, it hasn't worked out well, as you know. But again, and then the other thing too is you have these lines that extend out from the airports. We saw what happened in Brussels. It was an attack on the American airlines and the passengers. Their intent was to kill as many as they can. You cited the attack in Los Angeles. So they're looking for the easiest targets. TSA provides a layer of protection once they get past that. And then we've got secure cockpit doors. We've got air marshals. We've got pilots who are armed. The biggest thing we have, and they've always come to the rescue since that hour of 9/11 when the passengers on Flight 93 found out what was going on. The passengers will beat the living hell out of anyone who poses a true risk. So, and they have saved the day, and also the airline staff. I have to give them credit. They've been there too. So, again, my concern: we built this huge bureaucracy. We've got these bureaucrats in charge. They have their revengeful way of controlling the agency, which it shouldn't be. So I'm glad to hear the confidence everybody has in Neffinger. I'm not happy to hear there's no Plan B. That is essential, and we've got to make certain, I mean, we cast a lot of responsibility for the FSDs in making it work, and they're going to catch holy heck when those lines continue to back up. But some common sense things, the pre-checked, advancing that. I've gone to national. I will say it's improved because I've thrown a couple of fits, but there are more people in pre-check than there are on the other lines, and nobody moves them to accommodate people. I saw the dogs the other day, and they're using the dogs and people in line to get into TSA. I think we need to move a few dogs to the front doorway like the Israelis do. They're checking people as they come in before they can get to the line to take out the people like they did in Brussels. So just some suggestions, again, that the common sense that I hope you all can take back. I know you've tried to make positive suggestions and been, and also, I don't think any of you did it to be mean or vengeful to anybody above, but you have the best interest, I think, of the public and those who work for us. So not as many questions as comments. Very helpful hearing. We'll have the administrator in a couple of weeks here. Any last remarks, Mr. Brainard?
You know, one of the things they talked about, and I guess because this committee certainly has some level of influence, when you talk about our workforce and the wonderful people that come to work every day, if I could just kind of pose it like this, imagine if every year you had to run for re-election. I mean, you'd almost never get...
I do it every 2.
Well, imagine doing it every year.
My contract expires every 24 months.
Well, with our people, it expires every year, and they've
Yeah.
got to recertify for their job. And I would hope that, at least in looking forward, one of the things that we could certainly do better with our people is find another option. Our people get incredibly stressed out every year. They do a very stressful job as it is. They do it very well. What you don't hear about in the media a lot of times are the success stories that do happen every day, the amount of dangerous items they are preventing to get on aircraft. And I know that our people, in some cases, could certainly find other opportunities. We're very grateful to have the wonderful team that we do. But if there's a way to take that stress off our workforce, we would really appreciate it.
Well, again, it starts from up here, and you all, the FSDs, work at certain constraints from what comes from, you know, it flows downhill, as the saying goes. Mr. Livingston?
Sir, we have brought up some very serious issues here today. Some were new, some were reported back in the original GAO summary that went to you in October 2009. But if we can agree that some of these need to be addressed now and we support the administrator, this is a prime opportunity to advance the operational success of TSA. None of the things said today here were personal or specific.
No, you're
yes, sir.
Speaking in the betterment of TSA.
And the last 2 points, sir, is if we could take a look at how the ERC, or the Executive Resource Council, appoints these SESs at TSA, that might be a way for you to exert your most control over TSA, because that's where the pay, the assignments, the selections, the reassign, that's the nucleus for everything. And I'm just not sure that it isn't effective in the best interest, because I've heard you speak several times, both here and on the committees, and to the administrator, and several things you've said over and over, but I haven't seen the actual actions that you've actually.
Oh, you can't imagine my frustration.
Yes, sir.
And sometimes they've ignored me. They've tried to do everything they can to divert to.
Yes, sir. But I think if you exerted control.
Well, I think you saw sort of bipartisan support. Again, I've never, since we created TSA, I've never seen anyone come forward. Most people have been afraid to come forward. I remember we offered some people to even put bags over their heads, like we've done in the past with some witnesses, to come in and testify. But you all are very brave. You've stood up to it, and I think you do it again because you're trying not to be mean towards anyone or vindictive towards anyone, but to better the operations which you see. Mr. Rhodes, you wanted to conclude?
Yes, sir. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak before the committee.
Yeah.
It's very important to me. I hope I've communicated issues along with resolutions after reflective thought, and I'm very humbled that to be asked here. I appreciate the opportunity to be heard. If there is one thing that I wish the committee would have oversight on is the directed reassignments policy. It is absolutely abysmal. Yeah. And this is not personal, it's professional to me. As a parting suggestion, I would do an audit of all the TSA programs, awards, hiring, external to TSA, because you cannot fix a problem unless you diagnose it correctly. And The TSA has a history and has certainly demonstrated that the responsiveness at times has not been there, however embarrassing it is. But in order for us to get healthier, we have to diagnose the problem and we have to take our medicine. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, I appreciate, again, all three of you stepping forward. I think, again, this can be a constructive hearing and hopefully a constructive path forward that you all have helped lay out. So there being no further business before the committee, this meeting is adjourned.
turns your mic on and off.
Okay.
No, it's live.